Chapter 1192. Exchanging a level 5 Divine Fire Orb and a level 4 Moon Spring for the level 5 Shadow Orb. No one would be willing to make such a losing trade. But the Shadow Orb was too important to the Dark Witches. Even if she had to pinch her nose, Cersei could only bitterly accept such an unfair trade. After getting the Shadow Orb, Cersei glared at Grimm and was about to turn around and leave, but Grimm stopped her. "What are you trying to do?" Cersei was shocked and immediately prepared for battle. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of fear. This was Alicent's Tower of Destiny, not the dark secret realm of the Dark Witches. If Alice really had any evil intentions, the combination of Alice, Grimm, and Shadow Devil would have a high chance of keeping her here. Therefore, even though she knew that it was unlikely that Alice would betray the Northern Witches, Cersei still felt nervous. "Our trade is not over yet. Why are you in such a hurry to leave, Lord Cersei?" Grimm coughed softly. His mental weakness was still obvious. "Isn't the trade already over? What else is there to trade?" Cersei asked cautiously. "Then does Leader Cersei mean that you don't want this fellow anymore?" Grimm smiled faintly and drew a circle in the air. The crimson fire elements converged into a mirror, revealing a young witch who was bound and unable to move. Looking at her appearance, attire, and emblem, the bound person was a Tier 3 Dark Witch. "So it's Karen." Cersei's expression brightened, pretending to be surprised. "Lord Grimm, why did you tie up a young witch of my family? This does not seem to be a good intention." Grimm was already mentally prepared for Cersei's refusal to acknowledge the deal. "I didn't capture her in the territory of the Dark Witches, but in my wizard's pagoda. Do you really not know anything about what she has done?" Seeing that Grimm's tone was not harsh, as if there was still room for negotiation, Cersei hurriedly said, "She is a young witch of my family, sent to the central part of the continent for training. Perhaps she was ignorant and accidentally entered your territory. How about this? We, the Dark Witches, are willing to do our best to compensate for your losses. This should be fine, right?" Grimm wasn't soft-hearted towards the Dark Witch. He threw out a piece of parchment with dozens of valuable resources listed on it. They were all precious resources that the Crimson family needed urgently for the blood sacrifice ceremony, but the Crimson family could not gather them at the moment. Although he wanted to reject the offer and let the other party continue to worry about these resources, he didn't want to waste any more time. However, the significance of a Tier 3 Dark Witch to a family was indescribable. Especially at this time, when the family had suffered heavy losses, if they were to lose a Grade 3, which for a mere little resource, even with Cersei's authority and strength, they would probably face the questioning and condemnation from within the family. Cersei raised his head again. His black eyes stared at Grimm through the thick black mist for a long time before he finally spoke. "Let Karen go and let her return to the encampment in the center of the continent. I'll send you the resources you need as soon as possible." The dignified leader of the Dark Witches had personally spoken, so Grimm could accept this bit of credibility. Without wasting any time, Grimm waved his hand and condensed a few flame runes that flew straight into the fire mirror. Very soon, under the command of the Tower Spirit in the distance, a group of high-grade magical equipment escorted Witch Karen out of the flame cave. After removing the restraints of the witchcraft, Karen crawled up from the ground after a long time. She cast a hateful glance at the terrifying place that had humiliated her, turned around, and dove into the darkness, disappearing without a trace. Caesar nodded silently and hurriedly left the Tower of Destiny. After he left, Grimm looked at Alice and asked anxiously, "Can this moon spring replenish your life force?" Alice saw his eager expression and felt a little sweet in her heart. She smiled and said, "It's enough. Don't forget that I've just reached Tier 4 as well. My life dimension has already lengthened considerably. With this moon spring, I'll be able to make up for the deficiency in my life force. Regaining the lifespan of a rank 4 Magus shouldn't be a problem." After getting Alice's affirmation, Grimm was slightly relieved and completely put his mind at ease. After chatting with Grimm, Alice looked at the divine fire pearl and moon spring floating in front of them, and suddenly took a step forward. As she took this step, The complicated spell formations engraved on the floor of the astrology hall lit up one after another. In the blink of an eye, the hall turned into a mysterious little boat floating in the sea of stars. The light in the hall suddenly dimmed, and in the depths of the dark and deep night sky, dazzling stars emitted endless starlight power, rendering this place into a mysterious and beautiful world. Alice had become fully armed at some point in time. She held a prophecy scepter in one hand and an hourglass in the other. She wore a witch mask and a mercury belt around her waist. Cards of destiny with exquisite patterns floated around her, constantly changing the contents of the cards. Upon reaching Tier 4, the Destiny Witches would gain some unique abilities. Although they couldn't be said to be outstanding in battle, they could be considered a super strong support member. After the transformation, Alice's body rapidly expanded and grew. In the blink of an eye, she had become a beautiful goddess who was hundreds of meters tall and exuded a mysterious aura. Her mind was immersed in the dazzling starry sky. She raised the prophecy scepter high and chanted a mysterious incantation, pointing at the two divine weapons. Two rays of gentle starlight shone down from the pitch-black sky, turning into exquisite starlight chains that wrapped around them. In an instant, Grimm lost his spiritual connection to the divine fire pearl and moon spring. At the same time, two furious spiritual waves suddenly spread out from the depths of the starry sky. One was violent, the other clear, but both were filled with hatred. With the divine weapons sealed, the connection between them and their original owners had become much weaker. Now, be it the owner of the divine fire pearl, Renai, or the owner of the moon spring, Mivi, they had lost the last bit of connection to their divine weapons. In the future, even if they invited the god of prophecy, they might not be able to find the location where the divine weapons were sealed. The tall and majestic Alice waved and pushed with one hand, and the sealed divine fire pearl floated in front of Grimm. I've already sealed the aura of divine power on the divine fire pearl. This will save the god of fire the trouble of tracking it down. If you want to study the divine fire pearl, you must open up an independent space. Before you can truly control the divine fire pearl, you must not bring it out of the independent space. Otherwise, the god of fire will be able to sense its location, as well as the aura of your soul. If that happens, the Crimson family will be in deep trouble. Grimm let out a bitter laugh. Was it the trouble he was in? At the very least, the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda still had a holy book of wisdom, which could not be seen in the light of day. If the god of wisdom sensed Grimm's soul aura through the holy book of wisdom, as long as Grimm left the protection of the wizard world, the god of wisdom would track him down and teach him an unforgettable lesson, even if he had to travel to the ends of the earth. As the saying went, don't worry when you have too many debts, and don't itch when you have too many lice. The amount of hatred that Grimm bore now was simply too much to ask for. To be honest, a god of fire from another world was not enough to scare him. Even if he did not leave the wizard world for hundreds of years, he did not believe that the gods would not let him go just because of a mere divine weapon. Furthermore, it was the dark witches who had come to rob the divine weapon. If they wanted to find someone, they would first find trouble with the dark witches. With this confidence, Grimm became confident. Although he had the intention to stay and be affectionate with Alice, the divine fire bead was constantly teasing his heart, making him impatient to make it his own. The divine fire pearl was different from the shadow pearl. The shadow pearl's power was not compatible with Grimm. Using the shadow pearl for a long time would instead cause Grimm to be infected by the shadow. The gains did not make up for the losses. On the other hand, the divine fire pearl was a level 5 divine weapon with a fire element, and it was completely compatible with Grimm's original element. As long as he could erase the divine power imprint left behind by the god of fire Renai, Grimm would be able to reach the heavens in a single step, obtaining a true divine weapon that belonged solely to him. Even the level 5 wizards would go crazy with jealousy if he could obtain such a good thing. After all, not every level 5 wizard or wizard weapon was in possession of a level 5 divine weapon or wizard weapon. Furthermore, It was a level 5 divine weapon that was completely compatible with his original element. The value of such an item was even more difficult to estimate. After a simple greeting to Alice, Grimm excitedly grabbed the divine fire pearl and returned to the blazing flame monarch. The first thing he did when he returned was naturally to open up a space independent of the wizard's pagoda. With the endless supply of energy from the wizard's pagoda, Grimm tore open a space crack and stabilized it. He then slowly expanded it until it became an alternate space of about 100 square meters. Of course, if there was a need, Grimm could expand the alternate space even further. But that would also take up too much of the wizard's pagoda's energy supply, and it would not be worth it. This way, the blazing flame monarch had anchored 2 alternate spaces within the wizard's pagoda. One was used to store the Holy Book of Wisdom, while the other was used to store the divine fire pearl. Both were treasures that Grimm needed the most right now. Chapter 1193. The miniaturization and simplification of the levitation ring. This was one of Grimm's main goals. Since the research involved the essential difference between arcana and witchcraft, it was extremely slow and difficult to make progress. In fact, both arcana and witchcraft originated from the primitive study of magic tattoos. They were both supernatural abilities that the ancient spellcasters developed by imitating the natural magic tattoos of monsters. However, in a later period of development, the wizards still insisted on the chaotic, bloody, and taboo part of the ancient witchcraft, while the arcanists promoted a simplified and somewhat castrated version of the ancient witchcraft. The simplified and castrated version was indeed easier to learn and understand, and it effectively expanded the number of arcanists. Unfortunately, the simplified and castrated version was exactly the mysterious part that was derived from the coupling of supernatural abilities and the rules of the world. Without them, without the mysterious and unpredictable content, arcana was indeed much easier to learn. Even the less talented apprentices were able to smoothly advance to the next level with experience and skills. However, this also cut off the original connection between arcana and the rules of the illusory world, which made it much more difficult for arcanists to advance to the next level than it was for wizards. The wizards, on the other hand, still stuck to the ancient tradition. The witchcraft they used was bloody and cruel, and it was also filled with chaotic and mysterious content. The same runes, the same witchcraft, in the hands of different wizards could show completely different effects. Also, with the improvement of their own skills and the improvement of their killing skills, the combat ability of a wizard was usually 3 to 5 times higher than that of an arcanist of the same level. Therefore, some busybodies concluded that arcanists focused on knowledge and equipment, while wizards focused on skills and methods. Arcanists respected knowledge, while magi respected power. The essential difference between the two spellcasters was reflected in the material. The arcanist's equipment was more delicate, while the wizard's equipment was simple, crude, and even bloody. The levitation ring was not complicated in principle, and the basic knowledge was also very simple. It was to use a simple force field spell to form an anti-gravity barrier with a fixed direction and shape, and then push the material to float in the air in a gravity-free state. However, the energy used in the levitation ring was arcane energy that had been purified and tamed many times. Compared to the magic energy used by magi, the energy was less than 67%. This kind of arcane energy was easy to store, compress, and modify. It could even be directly injected into the spellcaster's body. The radiation damage to ordinary people was also minimized. Due to the huge difference between arcane energy and witchcraft energy, if Grimm did not find a way to improve it and directly used a wizard circle to supply energy to the levitation ring, it would cause the energy system to become unstable, and the levitation ring would not be able to work stably. In a worst-case scenario, the energy system would collapse, and a terrifying chain of explosions would occur. After all, the arcana system and the witchcraft system were two civilizations that had developed independently. Although there were similarities or overlaps in many aspects, there were more areas where irreconcilable contradictions and conflicts manifested. Therefore, when it came to looted arcane knowledge, most sorcerers could only extract the useful content and use it. As for the parts that were inherently contradictory, they could only abandon them like a pair of old shoes. After all, it was extremely difficult to fuse two completely different casting systems together. It was not something that could be easily solved by one or two generations of magi or one or two geniuses. Therefore, looting arcana civilizations was more of a way for the higher-ups of the magi to expand their knowledge and find a similar civilization that they could use as a reference. When Grimm wanted to use the arcana knowledge he had looted on rune formations, witchcraft, and equipment, he faced a similar problem. There were more than 200 to 300 types of runes related to fire in the witchcraft system, but there were only 7 origin runes. The rest were almost all variations or combinations of origin runes. After a period of research and experimentation, Grimm found the corresponding arcana runes in the arcana system that corresponded to the 7 origin runes of fire. Unfortunately, the rune formations that were carved with the arcana runes were either ineffective or would cause all sorts of strange phenomena. This gave Grimm a headache and made him feel helpless. Although the AI chip was very powerful, it was powerless when it came to the higher realms of mysticism. It could no longer cheat like before and guide Grimm to advance rapidly. After all, at his current level, the knowledge and experience brought about by the mortal world and past memories were completely useless. In the domain of mysticism, every step forward required constant exploration and verification. Failure was a common occurrence. The reason for this was the uncertainties of mysticism. According to the data collected by the AI chip, mysticism originated from the subtle changes in the force field caused by the combination of magic energy and various substances. Due to the differences in substances, environments, and materials, countless minute force fields would resonate, forming larger, newer, and more complex energy spaces. In such a situation, the commonness was temporary, small, and partial, while the dynamic changes from time to time with a phenomena of mysticism in a broader sense. Magic itself pursued this kind of uncertainty, using the minute changes in the local energy to pry open the power of the laws of the plane and guide the laws of the world in the direction that one wanted. This was the true essence of magic. In this process, the only thing that a magus could grasp was the guidance part. Using incantations, hand gestures, casting materials, spell formations, and other methods to guide the energy in the beginning. How did the resonance and rendering of the energy move the laws of the plane? And how did the vibrations of the laws of the plane travel to the laws of the world? Low-ranked magi did not know about these things. Only high-ranked magi who had come into contact with the laws of the plane could continue to research in this area. Using fire spells as an example, when Grimm was at rank 1, he researched how to attract more fire elemental particles when he gathered fireballs, causing the fire elemental particles to resonate more. In other words, he researched how to make the fireballs more abundant, increase the radius of the explosion, and increase the power of the explosion. At the second tier, Grimm focused more on the penetration and conductivity of fire energy. As for tier 3, Grimm's research focused on the conversion and fusion of fire energy and other magic energy. At the end of the day, before rank 4, Grimm's research was only on the surface of fire spells, and he had not touched on the origin of fire energy. Now, after becoming a rank 4 fire magus, he had unexpectedly grasped 4 low-ranked laws of fire. Grimm's research had begun to advance towards the origin of magic for the first time. In this field, there were no pioneers, no past experience, and no rules to follow. Everything had to be figured out bit by bit from nothing. Every high-ranked magus was a knowledgeable person, and they all had rich achievements in their own field of knowledge. However, their research was closely related to their own abilities. Once this knowledge and experience was spread, it would mean that everything about them would be revealed to the public. This would indirectly bring great danger to him. It was because of these considerations that high-ranked magi's research was usually secretive and never made public. They would only teach or trade within a small circle and would never contribute their theories to the public like the Arcanists. In comparison, the situation within the three major Magus organizations was slightly better. By using resources, materials, and magic crystals as rewards, they could exchange for some secondary and less sensitive research information and content from many magi. These things could also be used as mission rewards to motivate low-ranked magi who did not have the ability to conduct research in this field, but were in urgent need of related knowledge, to gather within the organization and form a true force. However, in the Central Continent, the Magus organizations and forces were too scattered, and almost all of them existed in the form of Magus families of various sizes. The related knowledge would only be circulated within a small circle within the family, which was why the Magus system in the Central Continent was much weaker than that of the three major Magi organizations. Therefore, if Grimm wanted to conduct research on high-ranked Magus, he could only explore on his own, and also seek help from the three major Magus organizations. Now that Grimm and the Northern Witches were on bad terms, it was impractical for him to obtain high-ranked Magus knowledge from them. Moreover, the Magus Association was an iron bucket, and if he could not find a suitable introducer or entry point, it would be extremely difficult to purchase knowledge from them. Comparing all of them, the Silver Alliance was still the most suitable. The Silver Alliance was indeed the largest Magus organization with the strongest commercial atmosphere. As long as you had enough magic crystals, there was no spell or resource you could not buy. However, the high-ranked knowledge that was useful to grade 4 magi was too expensive. Even with Grimm's current net worth, the astronomical amount of magic crystals still gave him a headache. The reason why Grimm wanted to enter the Outer Realm was because of the abnormally popular resource trading market in the Outer Realm. There were tens of thousands of planes, and each was different. Each had its own unique system of planes and resources. An item that was extremely rare in the Magus world might only be a mid-level resource in another world. Therefore, if he could act as a middling broker in this huge market of tens of thousands of planes, buying high and selling low, and integrating and trading resources across planes, the huge profits he could bring was not something a small family in a plane could imagine. Chapter 1194. Another Dimension. This was a strange space that was only 100 square meters in size. There were no doors or windows, no walls, no floor, and no ceiling. There wasn't even a way in or out. The entire space was an enclosed space surrounded by a strange, translucent force field. If one stood at the edge of the space and knocked on the force field wall, it would produce dull, thumping sounds. This meant that the force field wall was a real substance and not a hazy and illusory thing. Looking through the force field wall, one could only see a dazzling light that flowed with strange colors, making it difficult to tell where they were. There was no air, soil, or water in the plane, so it was impossible for there to be any life here. But it wasn't lonely here. When Grimm entered this space through the teleportation formation in the corner of the space, he was greeted by a terrifying stream of flames that could corrode metal and corrode bone. The crimson flames washed over Grimm's body, but they did not hurt him at all. Instead, they turned into dense fire energy that was close to materializing, rushing into Grimm's body. Grimm could feel the extremely abundant fire energy in his body, and he could also feel the long-dried spirit sea that was eagerly waiting for the sweet due to descend. At this place, under the nourishment of the strange and pure flame energy, it seemed that the wounds in his soul origin that were riddled with holes had healed. His entire body, mind, and spirit couldn't help but feel refreshed, and he was once again filled with that feeling of strength. There was nothing in the entire space. Only the fire god's bead floated alone in the air, slowly emitting waves of extremely pure fire energy. If it was purely fire energy, then the heart of flame in Grimm's body could achieve a similar effect, and it would be easier for him to control. Therefore, there had to be something unusual about the flames flowing out of the divine fire bead that could nourish and strengthen Grimm's mind. Grimm didn't rush to get close to the divine fire bead, and instead silently observed it from afar. The starry sky seal that Alice added was still effective, and there were no abnormal energy fluctuations in the divine fire bead. The reason why there was an endless flow of fire energy was because the divine fire bead itself was a powerful and terrifying energy source. The fire energy came from the void and gathered in the core of the divine fire bead. Most of it was transformed into a strange energy of a higher level, and a small portion was released to change the surrounding environment. If Grimm didn't absorb the scattered fire energy into space, the next time he came here, it would have become a sea of fire energy. If the divine fire bead was given enough time and space, it could even create a fire space or a molten world out of thin air. The existence of the divine fire bead had caused some strange changes in the space. The edge of the space was filled with scattered seas of fire, like beautiful silk ribbons dancing in the air. As he neared the center of the divine fire bead, the flames became even more intense. The divine fire bead could no longer be seen clearly. And when he was within 10 steps of the fire god bead, the fire energy here had already condensed into a viscous liquid substance, enveloping the fire god bead in a gigantic fireball. Grimm stood at the edge of the divine fire bead, blue light flashing in the depths of his black pupils. In the blink of an eye, he could see all the changes in the space. Grimm stood at the edge of the divine fire bead, blue light flashing in the depths of his black pupils. In the blink of an eye, he saw all the changes in the space. The intensity of the fire energy radiation at the edge of the divine fire bead reached 137 degrees, while the center had already soared to 335 degrees. As for the huge fireball, its internal radiation reached 628 degrees. If Grimm was only a Tier 3 sorcerer, he would only be able to move around the edge and center of the divine fire bead. If he got too close to the fireball, his life would be in danger. Fortunately, Grimm had already reached Tier 4, and he had a chaotic physique. Hence, he could move around freely in the divine fire bead like a fish in water. Grimm had once tried to use the equipment in the laboratory to analyze the secret of the divine fire bead. However, when the extracted fire energy left the divine fire bead's radiation range, the strange energy inside would quickly weaken and turn into ordinary fire energy. This meant that the biggest secret of the divine fire bead was the divine fire bead itself. Grimm walked leisurely in a mysterious sea of fire energy. Every time his mental energy fluctuated, it would set off huge tsunamis in the sea of fire. At the same time, the spiritual energy that he released was constantly channeling some kind of strange energy into his body, making him feel warm. It was as if he was soaking in a hot spring on a snowy mountain, feeling lazy and not wanting to do anything. Although his body was lazy, his mental energy was getting more and more excited. Countless fire particles that resonated with his mental energy rushed into the broken divine fire bead's divine fire bead, slowly but firmly repairing the damage. During this process, even Grimm's soul was nourished to a certain extent and became stronger. Grimm slowly walked to the front of the huge fireball and reached his right hand into it. As soon as his hand entered the fireball, he felt the impact and scorching heat of the flames coming from all directions. If it was someone else instead of him, their entire arm would have turned into a pile of charcoal in a few seconds, their flesh eroded by the shockingly high temperature. However, he was a legendary rank 4 fire shaman after all. This terrifying heat was just right for him. Moments later, the fireball trembled and the energy dissipated. The divine fire bead turned into a fist-sized bead, and Grimm obediently pulled it out. "Come out and talk. I know you're in there," Grimm said calmly. Aside from the divine fire bead, there was not a single living person in front of him. "Playing dead doesn't work on me." Grimm curled his lips, unable to conceal the ridicule on his young and handsome face. "You better not be Renai's consciousness clone. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to erase you completely." Feeling Grimm's abnormally fierce threat, as well as the terrifying flame energy in his body, the divine fire bead that had been lying quietly in his palm finally moved a little. With a whoosh, flames surged out. A golden flame surged out of the bead, swirling and churning, and then condensed into a strange, flaming human face. How did you sense my presence? Honestly, those two ferocious women didn't seem to notice me. How did you do it? The flaming human face spoke in a strange child's voice. It sounded cute and bewitching. Ferocious women? Huh. If Alice hears you, you won't have a good time. As for sensing your presence, there's nothing strange about that. I've encountered a sentient flaming tiger in the fire elemental plane before, so I'm familiar with the elemental life undulations you give off. A sentient flaming tiger. The flaming human face lowered its head and muttered, its tone filled with longing and envy. All right, since you're an artifact spirit with sentience, you should know what I'm going to do to you, right? Grim threatened coldly. Speak. Do you intend to release the core of your consciousness, or do you want me to spend some effort to completely erase your existence? The smile on the flaming human face disappeared, and its voice changed from a child's to a low, hoarse male voice. Erase my consciousness? Hee, little Magus, I'm not trying to mock you, but even a great Magus wouldn't be able to do that. You're just a rank 4 Magus, and I'm the artifact spirit of a rank 5 divine weapon. You can't do anything to me. Grim chuckled and clenched his right hand, cutting off the energy supply from the divine fire bead. The flaming human face vanished in an instant, turning into sparks that filled the sky. Hey, Chip, begin microscopic scan. Report the results to me at any time. Beep. Mission established. Beginning scan. The AI, Chip's mechanical voice, sounded in the depths of Grim's mind. 2 deep blue beams of light shot out from Grim's eyes, focusing on the divine fire bead and changing the frequency. The outer shell of the divine fire bead was a strange crystal. It was cold and slippery to the touch, and he could not feel the slightest bit of warmth. However, when the light and scanning rays hit it, most of the energy lines were refracted, unable to penetrate the crystal at all. Even the energy spectral lines that had luckily passed through the crystal shell seemed to have fallen into a fiery space of infinite breadth and depth. Before they could break through the dense fiery clouds inside, they were annihilated by the surging fiery energy. With a soft puff, Grim tilted his head, and a faint black smoke came out of his eyes. Grim closed his eyes, and 2 viscous streams of blood flowed out of his eye sockets, slowly flowing down his cheeks. I was careless just now, and the energy lines that penetrated the divine fire bead were reflected back at me, causing some minor damage to my eyeball. He could only shut his eyes tightly, controlling the sodden divine ring on his left hand to release waves of pure holy light to slowly heal his injured eyeball. The fire energy he controlled was naturally second to none in terms of attack power, but when it came to healing injuries, it could not compare to this pure holy light. After bending his fingers a few times, the numbness on his eyeball gradually disappeared. When Grim opened his eyes again, everything had returned to normal, as expected of a Tier 5 godly artifact. Although the wielder had lost control of his soul consciousness, and most of the wielder's abilities had been sealed, the wielder's instinctive counterattack had still managed to inflict some damage on Grim. Grim gritted his teeth and chuckled. Without hesitation, he concentrated his energy in his eyes again, turning them into 2 breathtaking blue beams of light that struck the divine fire bead. Chapter 1195. The Moon Spring, a sacred item of the elves. It had magical powers that surpassed the spring of life, spring of youth, and spring of magic. The spring of life could restore a large amount of life force that was lost without any side effects. Drinking the spring of youth could maintain one's youth forever, allowing one's entire body to always be at the peak of one's life. It would not change with the passage of time until the moment of death. The spring of magic could allow extraordinary creatures to quickly restore their mana. The process was gentle and calm, and there would be no magical backlash. The moon spring had the advantages of these elven treasures. It could bathe in the moonlight and produce a magical spring every once in a while. From then on, the holder of the moon spring would forever be free from the loss of life force, youth, and lack of mana. Even the famous moon well seed of the elves needed to be soaked in the moon spring in advance before it could germinate and grow into the moon well, which was of great significance to the elves. If the spring of life was an elven treasure that could restore one's life force, then the moon spring blessed by the moon goddess Mivi could continuously restore one's life force. Such an auxiliary item was worthy of being a top-notch artifact for professionals who relied on life force. With the moon spring, Alice did not need to be as cautious and calculative when she performed her divination. She was afraid of accidentally triggering the backlash of fate, which would devour what little life force she had left. It was precisely because the moon spring was so important to the Destiny Witches that Alice led all the Destiny Witches to the astrology hall on the top floor of the tower to hold a grand fate prayer ceremony on the second day after she obtained the moon spring. From the outside, the moon spring looked like a pool of crystal clear spring water. It was only 2 to 3 square meters in size, and it was placed in a simple wooden basin. Whenever the moonlight shone through the transparent dome and shone on the spring water, it would emit specks of silver light, filling the entire hall with the fragrance of vegetation after a rain. When Alice was at Tier 3, she used up almost 80% of her life force in order to cast the blessing of fate on Grimus, who had sneaked into the Morian plane. If not for the power of fate that she had stolen as a Dimension Child, she would have been on the verge of death. Even though she had advanced to Tier 4 and lengthened her life dimension, the life force that she had lost previously could not be replenished through advancement. Without a doubt, this affected her life force after leveling up. Now, with the replenishment of the moon spring, her life force had been replenished. Now, after reaching Tier 4, her life dimension would stretch, allowing her to have the length of a normal Tier 4 being. Thus, this Destiny prayer ritual was of great significance to her. It was an unbearable weight in her life. Under the pious prayers of many Destiny Witches and apprentices, the shadow of the river of destiny slowly appeared in the hall. It came from the void, and then it flowed towards the distant void. It was vast and imposing, making one's soul freeze and foundation tremble upon contact. No one could see the source of the long river, and no one knew where the long river was going. An ancient aura settled in the long river, making people feel small and insignificant with just a glance. Although the Destiny Witches present had seen the River of Destiny with their own eyes many times, every time they immersed themselves in the thick and solid aura, they could still produce countless strange insights. As for the witch apprentices, because their souls were not strong enough, the moment the shadow of the River of Destiny appeared, they were already muddle-headed and lost. Among the many apprentices, only one girl's eyes were still bright, and her mind was still clear. She looked up at the surging torrent of fate not far above her head, and couldn't help but reach her hand into the strange belt of light. When her delicate fingertips touched the belt of light formed by the shadow of the River of Destiny, her body suddenly trembled. Her entire soul and life force trembled violently, as if it was about to leave her body and be swept away by the surging divine power of the River of Destiny. At this moment, a beautiful hand that emitted hazy starlight fell on her delicate head, and the power of the starlight spread throughout her entire body. With the power of the starlight, the young female apprentice's fingers finally escaped the entanglement of the River of Destiny. It was as if the beautiful belt of light existed on 2 different levels, overlapping with each other, and no longer had the terrible feeling of being smashed into pieces by the merciless power of fate. Lucia, don't rely on the favor of fate to do whatever you want. Alice gently stroked Lucia's long hair and slowly shook her head. Fate is a great power, is also cold and merciless. If you want to swim in the River of Destiny, you must first understand it, and obey it. And fate is also the most fair. It will make fair deals with you one after another. You know everything you want to know, so what are you going to use to exchange with fate? My life, my soul, my knowledge. I'm willing to use everything I have to exchange for it. Lucia stubbornly raised her head, looking straight into Alice's beautiful and peaceful eyes, and still persisted. Little fellow, Everything you just said is not worth mentioning in the face of fate. If you want to exchange with fate, you must make yourself valuable. So now it's not the time for you to contact and trade with fate. You'd better continue to learn and understand. When the time is right, you can stand in my current position to boldly and openly bargain with fate to carry out all kinds of transactions. Sister Alice, can the power of fate in the wizard world change the fate of the arcanists? That won't do. After all, the Morian plane where the arcane kingdom is located is also a main plane, only a small step away from being on par with the wizard world. The power of fate here can't change the plane of the same level. Alice looked down at Lucia, who was disappointed, and then said, "But you don't have to be disappointed. Your existence is the continuation of the arcane kingdom, and you're entrusted with a branch of fate that hasn't disappeared in the Morian plane. As long as you don't give up, the arcane kingdom will have a chance to rise again. So what does the power of fate in the wizard world want from me?" If it was any other girl, she would have been moved by such a tearful scene and would be grateful. But Lucia, who was in front of her, although her soul breath was low, the light of wisdom that never faded illuminated her heart. "I don't know." Alice smiled indifferently and didn't hide anything. Maybe it's waiting for the remnants of the arcane kingdom who escaped from the Morian plane to re-strengthen this branch of fate and then integrate them into it. Maybe it wants to introduce a new branch of fate into the wizard world and make it part of the power system of the wizard world. There are too many possible situations, and I can't give you a clear standard answer. Even to put it bluntly, every word you say now, every decision you make now, is also silently affecting the direction of this branch of fate. Fate is ethereal and unpredictable, but fate is also a future piled up one after another. It can be predicted and controlled to some extent. As for how to do this, you still need to continue to learn and practice. Otherwise, you can only be like now, powerlessly watching fate rush forward without being able to do anything. Lucia opened her eyes wide and stared blankly at the shadow of Alice, who stood in front of her like a beautiful goddess. After a long time, a bitter smile finally appeared on her face. "Thank you, Sister Alice. I can feel the sincerity from the depths of your soul, and thank you for not deceiving me. But I also want to remind you that you seem to be in for a disaster today. You must be careful." "Disaster?" Alice's heart stirred slightly. She casually condensed a magic mirror and reflected her own face. The delicate aura on her picturesque face was enough to make any man feel a sense of pleasure. The black hair on the top of her head was like black silk, adding a bit of gorgeous and mature charm to Alice's youthful charm. Looking at her complexion, spirit, and charm, it didn't look like she was going to be unlucky, but as a witch of fate, she didn't dare to ignore any signs and warnings. In particular, the fate prayer ceremony held today was related to whether Alice could successfully fill the gap in the source of life. If there was a mistake, the loss of a grade 4 treasure was secondary. The key would affect the length of Alice's life in the future. What went wrong? Or was someone secretly plotting against her? Alice closed her eyes and began to silently sense and deduce the cause, process, and result of the whole thing. But it was quite strange that the power of fate didn't send any warning to her. The result of her deduction and divination was neither good nor bad, and she really couldn't find any problem. Should she trust Lucia's senses and give up the fate prayer ceremony? Or should she continue? For a moment, Alice couldn't make a decision. "Alice, it's time." The little elf Helen flapped her wings and flew out of the witchcraft, circling up and down around Alice. "If you don't hurry up, you'll miss the best time for the starlight witchcraft to operate. What are you waiting for?" Alice took a deep breath, grabbed Helen, and whispered in her ear, "In a moment, I can go in by myself. You have to stay outside. If anything happens to me, you go to Grimm immediately. Maybe at that time, only he can save me." Little Helen's eyes immediately widened, and she really didn't understand what she had heard. Chapter 1196. The Blazing Flame Monarch. Grimm, who was silently competing with the divine fire orb in the alternate dimension, suddenly had a thought. He turned around and left. When he hurried to the secret teleportation room on the 5th level of the wizard's pagoda, he saw a familiar petite figure slowly appear. "Little Helen, why is it you? Where's Alice?" When Grimm saw Helen's familiar figure, an ominous premonition immediately appeared in his heart. "Batty, hurry up and take a look at Alice. She doesn't look like she's going to make it." Little Helen was as anxious as a bee whose nest had exploded. She flew up and down around Grimm, pulling his hair and dragging him into the teleportation formation. Grimm's face turned pale, and he entered the teleportation formation without hesitation. A moment later, Grimm was led by little Helen to the astrology hall on the top floor of the Tower of Destiny. The rippling power of the stars had not completely dissipated, and a large number of witches of destiny and apprentices stood silently by the wall. Sophia and Chef supported Alice as they slowly walked out of the spell formation. Alice's face was pale, and her exquisite long hair had turned snow white. Fine wrinkles could be seen at the corners of her eyes, cheeks, and the back of her hands. It had only been a few days, but she seemed to have entered the latter half of her life. Her life force was so weak that it was almost undetectable. "What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" Grimm rushed to Alice's side and questioned the two women next to him sternly. However, before Sophia and Chef could explain, Alice, who was on the verge of death, had already grabbed Grimm's arm and shook it gently. "No, it's not their fault. I was careless and fell into Medusa's trap." "Medusa?" Grimm's eyes widened when he heard this, and a terrifying stream of flames shot out of his crimson eyes. But he quickly suppressed his anger and asked in a low voice, "How did she do it?" Even though Alice and the great witch Medusa had been fighting fiercely all this while, Alice was in the wizard world and was protected by the laws of the dimension. Thus, even though Medusa hated her to the bone, she couldn't do anything to her. She was protected by the dimensional laws on the outside and the Tower of Fate on the inside. Furthermore, she was favored by the power of fate. No matter how one looked at it, Alice shouldn't have fallen into the enemy's trap. "She's already tampered with the moon spring." Alice weakly leaned on Grimm's body. She was so tired that she could not even open her eyes. Go find Amelia. This is a dead end. Only she..." At this point, Alice's body went limp and she fainted. The Tower of Destiny was sealed once more. In order to prevent the news of Alice's accident from spreading, Sophia and Chef could only do this. Fortunately, the Tower of Destiny was located in the desolate Dragonbone wasteland. Communication with the outside world wasn't that frequent, so it wasn't a problem for them to isolate themselves for a few months. But as time went on, some problems might arise. After all, after Alice had advanced to Grade 4, this place had become the focus of attention of other witch factions. Long periods of seclusion could easily attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. Alice had been poisoned by a type of time poison. Her life force had been greatly damaged to begin with, and the Fate Prayer ceremony was meant to recover this portion of her life force. However, the most important Grade 4 treasure of the ceremony, the Moon Spring, contained a strange type of time poison that quickly invaded Alice's life force. This type of poison could devour one's life force and was extremely difficult to remove. As a result, Alice's remaining life force was compressed and eroded, falling to a point where her life was in danger. A human's life force was like a candle. Once it was lit, it would continuously burn away. The candle that represented Alice's life force had been cut off by 80% in order to give Grimm the blessing of fate. Only a small section was left. Originally, with the help of the Moon Spring and her advancement to Grade 4, she had hoped to replenish her lost life force. However, she was ambushed by the Great Witch Medusa's time poison. This was equivalent to the small section of the candle being directly compressed into a thin piece, losing the thickness that life should have. Naturally, it could not support the continuation of the fire of life. Fortunately, Alice had a premonition beforehand and had used a full set of equipment to protect herself during the ceremony. That was why she did not directly die in the first wave of the time poison. However, Even with the protection of many of the exclusive equipment of the Witches of Fate, she did not have much time left. Amelia was quickly called to the Tower of Destiny, where she saw Alice, who was sealed in the Starlight spell formation. Just as she was feeling uneasy, Grim, who had been standing to the side, finally spoke. Before she was sealed, Alice said that you were the only one who could save her. Amelia could not help but be stunned, her beautiful face filled with shock. I don't even know what the poison in Lady Alice is. How can I save her? At this moment, Lucia, who had been silently following beside the Chave Witch, suddenly spoke. Madam Amelia, Alice said that only you can save her, but it does not necessarily mean that you can directly cure her of the poison. There could be other explanations. For example, you have heard of this poison, or you have seen something or someone that can save her, or you know a way to restore her life force. As Lucia spoke, Amelia's expression changed. Especially when Lucia mentioned the way to restore life force. Amelia's expression was even more flickering, and she looked like she was thinking about something. Did you think of something? Grim did not dare to interrupt her thoughts, and only asked her after she had calmed down. I can't do anything about the time poison in Lady Alice, because I have never even heard of such a poison. But what? However, I seem to have heard some rumors about the moon spring. Linian said. Rumors? What kind of rumors? At this point, Amelia's expression was strange and painful. After struggling for a long time, she finally faced Grim and said honestly, My lord, I'm afraid you already know my identity, right? Grim was slightly stunned. You mean the soul of the Mospoor princess that has fused with your soul? Amelia laughed bitterly. She knew that it would be difficult to hide this little secret that she had kept for 100 years from these high-grade wizards. The reason why Grim did not make a move on her or capture her as a test subject was because Gargamel and Ava were in front of her. Since my lord knows that my soul has fused with the consciousness of the Mospoor princess, you naturally know that the Mospoor race is not native to the sorcerer world, but from an ancient plane called the Spirit Realm. The Realm of the Spirits. Grim was no stranger to this name. The Realm of the Spirits was just as Amelia had said. It was a very ancient and famous plane. In that realm, there are all kinds of spirits of all shapes and sizes. Spirits were very strange, illusory spiritual bodies. They did not have a physical body, but each of them had unimaginable strange abilities. Many powerful spellcasters would use magic contracts to communicate with the spirits in the spirit realm, and then choose a spirit that was suitable for them to complete the contract. After the contract was completed, the spellcaster could easily summon the contract spirit from the spirit realm to the plane where they were and complete some of the work that they could do for them. The life-bound beasts that many wizards summoned were actually the appearance of the contract spirit and the native creature. This way, the contract spirit had a physical body and could exist in the material world for a long time. After quickly filtering the contents of the spirit realm in his mind, Grim still could not find a way to save Alice. He could not help but ask in a deep voice, What's in the spirit realm? Not what's in the spirit realm, but what's in the Mospoor race? For some reason, when a Mospoor race was mentioned, Amelia's beautiful face was almost completely distorted. Her face flashed with a crazy, hateful expression. She gritted her teeth and looked like she hated them to the bone. Tell me, what does the Mospoor race have? If your suggestion can really save Alice, I'll help you fulfill any small wishes you have. As a high-ranked magus, even the slightest fluctuation of Leyland's consciousness could not escape his senses. Furthermore, Amelia had made it so obvious. The water of life. Amelia answered without hesitation. The Mospoor race has the water of life. The water of life? Grim quickly searched the database in the AI chip, but strangely found nothing. This situation was very rare. It was either because this part of the information was too taboo and had been sealed by high-ranked magi, or because high-ranked magi had never heard of such information and had not recorded it. Grim glanced at Sophia and Chef. The two girls were also at a loss, but Lucia, who was only an acolyte, had a pensive look on her face. Explain. Grim looked at Amelia and said in a low voice. The water of life is actually a strange state when all the water elements gather together at the birth of a plane. As the plane is created, the water of life will constantly split, allowing the plane to be filled with an inexhaustible and limitless clear water. There's such a strange thing? Grimm could not help but sigh, once again lamenting the mysteries of the universe. So what does this water of life do? Purify. Amelia said in a crisp voice, I don't know if it can save Sister Alice, but it can definitely purify the poison in the moon spring. With the real moon spring, saving Sister Alice shouldn't be a problem, right? Grimm turned back to look at Sophia and Chef. The two girls nodded heavily. Chapter 1197. The Spirit Realm. The forest was silent under the night sky. Tall, ancient trees could be seen everywhere. Below the trees were emerald green shrubs that grew haphazardly, as well as colorful mushrooms that propped up the canopy like small umbrellas. Thick vines wrapped around the trunks of the ancient trees like snakes, layer by layer, extending all the way up into the tall and wide canopy. Standing in the middle of the forest and looking up, the sky was filled with intertwining vines and green radishes. They were like a three-dimensional net that connected the ancient trees together. The forest was not dark, other than the bright moonlight shining through the treetops and casting light blue beams of light into the forest. The glimmering moss and glowing mushrooms all over the place were also emitting colorful, strange fluorescence, reflecting the forest into a strange and bizarre world. And in this corner of the world that outsiders could not easily step into, three strange visitors broke the peace and serenity, appearing strangely. On a lush green grassland, a strange spatial singularity slowly opened up. A terrifying red mist that was so dense that one could not even see their own fingers gushed out from it. In an instant, the red mist occupied a large space with a radius of nearly 10 meters. The red fog shook, as if some strange monster was roaring and struggling inside. A moment later, the red mist dissipated, revealing three strange humanoid figures. The first was obviously a woman. Above her waist, she was still in the form of a human female, with breasts, buttocks, a slender figure, and an exquisite and beautiful face. But what was strange was that below her waist, her body structure was completely different from that of a human's. Countless soft wrought tans, thick or thin, long or short, extended out from her waist, supporting her entire body like an octopus tentacles. But what was even more surprising was that her skin was almost translucent, and there was a strange green and viscous liquid surging within. As the guide, Amelia was the first member to wake up from the plane teleportation. She moved her body, adapting to the plane's environment as she quietly observed her surroundings. The space inside the spirit realm was huge, and after leaving for so long, she could not guarantee that the plane teleportation she presided over would not deviate too far from its intended destination. Most of the red fog had dissipated, but there was still a portion that gathered together, condensing into a strange human figure that was constantly struggling to adjust itself. My lord, it's the spirit world. I can sense the unique aura of the plane here. Amelia reported respectfully to the flame figure after the inspection. The planar laws here seem to be completely different from those of other planes. It's somewhat similar to the elemental plane. Also, what's wrong with my body? Why is it in such a strange shape? Grimm's voice came from the flaming figure. He seemed to still be in a daze from the teleportation. My lord, the spirit realm is a strange world that is completely different from the other planes. Non-native creatures are unable to cross over with their physical bodies. Therefore, what you send over is only a mass of spiritual consciousness. If you control it according to your past habits and experience, there will naturally be a trace of discomfort. Mind consciousness. Grimm was shocked. You mean to say that my body is still in the Tower of Destiny, and that it's only my consciousness that came with you? Yes. Then what is this little guy? Grimm asked as he grabbed a green ball of light from his side. Master, it's me. I'm Remy. The voice of the plague spirit Remy sounded from the ball of light. Remy, why did you cross over with me? That's not strange, my lord. Lord Remy is your contracted spirit and is bound to your soul. Since you came to the spirit realm, you naturally brought him along with you. What appeared in the spirit realm is actually the true form of your soul. I see. Grimm communicated with Amelia as he called out to the AI chip in the depths of his consciousness. A dozen or so seconds later, the AI chip's distorted and hoarse voice sounded in the depths of his consciousness. Hiss, sensing severe spiritual interference. Hiss, not in the same plane as the main body. Hiss, communication of consciousness is severely delayed. AI chip, can you still help me after losing your body? Hiss, working hard to eliminate delay. Hiss, estimated time, 28 hours, 37 minutes, 21 seconds. In the past, the AI chip had been directly embedded into Grimm's genes. His body was responsible for providing the basic energy for operation, while his mind acted as the main body. Now that his consciousness had been separated from his body, the AI chip that had crossed over with Grimm was only a part of it. If he wanted to maintain contact with the main body in the Tower of Destiny, he would inevitably be affected by the different space-time of the two worlds. Hence, the AI chip would not be able to help him for the next 28 hours. Grimm sighed inwardly, knowing that he could only rely on himself now. He slowly stood up, his mind replaying his original appearance over and over again. It was strange. As he thought about it, the flaming figure that seemed to have been made up by a naughty child actually began to warp and change shape. The originally blurry face began to protrude, and distinct eyes, ears, mouth, and nose appeared. A moment later, a bright red light rolled past, and the flames on Grimm's body receded, revealing his young, handsome face and tall and sturdy body. A Grade 4 Magus was a Grade 4 Magus after all. In just a few short moments, he had grasped the basic application of energy shaping. Even though he was just a lump of consciousness without a physical body, he had created a perfect body that was close to materializing. A slight breeze blew past, and Grimm felt a slight chill on his body. Damn it, I only cared about shaping and did not create a set of clothes for myself. Ignoring the little girl who was blushing and trying to turn her face to the side, Grimm's mind spun. With the flow of a portion of his spiritual force, a fitting Magus robe appeared out of thin air, covering his perfect body. Energy materialization. Such a small method was not a problem for a Grade 4 Magus. After all, it was extremely difficult for a Grade 4 Magus to obtain supplies in many places. Hence, it was very convenient to use the energy conversion law to create simple daily necessities. However, enchanted items or magic tools with strange energy systems could not be created with just a simple condensation of consciousness. Having a set of clothes was not enough. Grimm stretched out his left hand, and a strangely shaped and exquisite flaming coral wizard staff appeared in his hand. He raised his right hand, and a white light wrapped around his pinky finger. An exquisite ring made of rose branches appeared. The flaming coral wizard staff and Sodden's divine ring. As expected of a Grade 4 item, they could use energy projection to project a portion of their power. This way, Grimm could save a portion of his spiritual force supporting their existence, and it could also prevent his basic combat power from dropping too much. As for the blazing set, since it was made of Grade 2 magic tools, it was only Grade 3 after it was formed. Hence, it could not use energy projection on its own, and it could not help Grimm in the soul realm. Of course, if Grimm was willing to spend a large amount of spiritual force to project their power, these low-grade items could also be used. However, every second that they existed was constantly consuming Grimm's spiritual force. At this point, Grimm finally understood. Why did so many high-grade wizards choose to be empty-handed instead of using low-grade magic tools? The real reason was that low-grade magic tools could not be used in most situations. Rather than keeping them to make up the numbers, it was better to reduce the burden on his spiritual force and save the energy for the truly useful magic tools. Grimm had only been promoted for less than 100 years, and he already had 2 Grade 4 equipment. Such extravagance was rare even among grade 4 wizards. Because of that, Amelia's gaze towards Grimm was filled with unconcealable admiration and admiration. Of course, Amelia did not know that Grimm had hidden 2 grade 5 divine weapons in his wizard's pagoda. Otherwise, she would definitely curse the plane's consciousness that was so biased in her favor. Master, I want a body too. Remy was only grade 3, and he was not good at controlling the mind. After several failed attempts, he could only beg for Grimm's help. Grimm rubbed the green ball of light that Remy's consciousness had created in his hand. A moment later, a lifelike chibi version of Peppa Pig appeared. No, I don't want to be a pig. He condensed a water mirror and saw his transformed appearance. Remy almost collapsed. He wailed desperately. Unfortunately, he did not have the power to create a body that was close to reality here. Thus, after a series of futile noises, it could only accept its new body dejectedly. Although Remy was not satisfied with his new body, he could tell from Amelia's passionate gaze that the chibi version of Peppa Pig was quite attractive to girls. After some commotion, the 3 of them finally completed the adaptation phase and could officially explore the spirit realm. As for Remy's main body in the Tower of Destiny, he would not be in any danger with the shadow demon protecting him. After packing up everything, Grimm looked at Amelia. This used to be your home, so you'll lead the way. Tell me, which direction should we go to the Spore Forest? Amelia closed her eyes and sensed for a moment before pointing in a direction. Chapter 1198. Although the spirit realm was a very strange world, there were many ordinary creatures that did not have any extraordinary abilities. However, these creatures were not ordinary. At the very least, they all had intelligence. Not long after they left the teleportation point, a strange rustling sound came from the bushes by the side of the road, and a little white rabbit with red eyes came out. This strange little white rabbit didn't seem to be afraid of humans. It stood up straight, and a human-like smile appeared on its furry little face as it greeted the 3 of them. Hello, visitors from outside. Welcome to the spirit realm. It had a strange accent and tone, but for no reason, Grimm could easily understand what it was saying. Hello. Grimm was still dressed like a magus, holding his staff as he sized up the little white rabbit. However, he did not find any signs of elemental energy gathering in its body. This was simply too inconceivable. One had to know that in most planes, creatures that could gain intelligence and communicate normally with humans were almost all high-rank magical creatures, and they would not be lower than rank 2. After all, without the support of magic, it was impossible for ordinary creatures to maintain the unique way of thinking of intelligent life with just their weak bodies and weak life force. Low-ranked creatures only had basic instincts and basic intelligence, while high-ranked creatures could develop complete intelligence. This was common knowledge in planes, but it obviously did not apply in the spirit realm. The spirit realm before him seemed to have greatly weakened the other laws of the plane, but abnormally maintained the strength of the laws of the spirit. This also meant that the native creatures of the spirit realm might be of very low rank, but they had shockingly high intelligence. At least in the Magus world, most little white rabbits only knew how to run around and eat grass, relying on their instincts to avoid the dangers of the natural world. How could they be like this little fellow in front of him, able to distinguish danger and even know about the existence of planes? Just as Grimm was quickly digesting the strange contents of this world, the demonic woman Amelia, who was standing behind him, stood out arrogantly and shouted, "Which family are you from, little fellow? Where are the adults in your family?" The little white rabbit stood up in surprise. Its pink nose sniffed at Amelia a few times, and a forced smile appeared on its 3-petaled rabbit lips. "You have the smell of those nasty spore men on you. It seems that you are another wanderer who escaped to another world. Also, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm from the Sydney family, an abandoned, and where are your parents? Those 2 old bastards left me behind and went to the seaside for a vacation." At this point, a sorrowful expression appeared on M's face as if she was about to cry. A scene naturally appeared in Grimm's mind. two old rabbits walking hand in hand towards the sunset. They were wearing vests and sunglasses, holding hands. Although this thought was absurd, the moment Grimm saw this scene, he believed it without a doubt, as if he had seen this scene before. The laws of the plane in the spirit realm seemed a little strange. Not only did it not suppress the spread and expansion of one's thoughts, but it also added fuel to the fire. All right, we don't have time to chat with you. Hurry up and tell me where the wise man of this jungle is. We need to ask him for directions. Amelia was, after all, half a native creature, so she still had painful memories of their words. She quickly interrupted M's sentiments and asked a crucial question. All right, annoying Sporeman lady. Walk west for 3 days, and you will see the wise man. Also, when you pass by Beta's hut, remember to say hi to him for me. After a simple farewell to M, the three of them immediately followed the direction that M pointed them to. Inadvertently turning back, Grimm even saw the little white rabbit, M, standing up straight and waving a white handkerchief that came out of nowhere to bid farewell to them. That scene made Grimm not know whether to laugh or cry. Along the way, Grimm's horizons were broadened. He had seen almost all kinds of unimaginable scenes. There were wild ducks that opened a grocery store on the side of the road, tabby cats that built a wooden house on a tree, apes that played hide-and-seek in the sunflower field, and most of them lived a simple life of working at sunrise and resting at dusk like intelligent life forms. Of course, the arrival of Grimm and his companions also made them restless and excited. They all came out of their dwellings and greeted them in strange tones. There was even a group of tabby cats wearing undergarments and nipples that ran into Grimm's arms and played with him. Strangely, there were not many native creatures around Amelia and Remy, who looked just as cute as her. Seeing this absurd scene, even someone as calm as Grimm was at a loss. He looked at the little fellows that crawled all over his body and frowned as he communicated with Amelia telepathically. Are the natives not afraid of strangers? Haven't they heard of the horror of wizards? Aren't they afraid that we'll eat them? As he spoke, Grimm frowned and pulled back a kitten that was curiously peeking into the pot, keeping it away from the steaming pot. My lord, don't underestimate the native creatures here. They have the sharpest spiritual senses. If you have any hostility towards them, they will be the first to sense it. Amelia squatted beside the campfire, adding firewood to the bottom of the pot while stirring the pot with a ladle. Steam rose from the pot, and the soup in it bubbled, wrapping up some fresh mushrooms and large pieces of stewed meat. The mushrooms were plucked from nearby, and the stewed meat was brought over from the Magus world. When they entered the Soul Realm, Amelia had warned Grimm and Remy not to kill any animals or plants that could speak. Otherwise, they would not be able to get any help from the natives in the future. Amelia took this matter very seriously. Hearing Amelia's reply, Grimm could not help but fall into deep thought. However, when he lowered his head again, he found that the kittens that had been playing in his arms had gathered together, looking at him with big, bright eyes. The leader of the group, a little kitten, stood up and asked in a childish voice, "Respected Lord Wizard, will you eat us?" Grimm's expression changed slightly. He really didn't expect that when he just communicated with Amelia using the spirit language, all the ideas were still in his mind, and he hadn't put them in action yet. But these little kittens had already sensed something. They did not have any signs of elemental condensation, nor did they have any signs of extraordinary abilities, but they could sense the hidden malice of a grade 4 Magus. How could this not make Grimm sigh? Don't worry, we Magi have no interest in little fellows like you. If you get fatter and gain more meat, I might consider eating you. With that, Grimm put on a ferocious face and bared his fangs to intimidate them. Strangely, however, no matter how fierce Grimm acted, the kittens were not afraid at all. Instead, they rushed into his arms and snuggled together. The creatures of the soul realm naturally like to get close to those with superior spiritual force. That's why the jungle sage we're going to visit is the smartest and most knowledgeable one in this land. However, most of these fellows have learned how spellcasters trade fairly when they're out adventuring, so they might ask you to trade with them. Trade? What kind of trade? What do I need to prepare in advance? Nothing much. Most of their requests are for some special snacks. Only a few fellows will ask for other strange requests. Just do what you can and make your own choice. If the sage here can't handle it, we can go to other places and find other local sages to trade with. Grimm pondered for a moment and asked, "You mean that the spirit realm isn't divided by race or region, and that every place revolves around the wise ones you mentioned?" "Yes," Amelia nodded. "There are no so-called strong and weak in the soul realm. Only so-called ordinary people and sages. These wise ones were usually those who had signed contracts with other planes and had seen the contracted spirit creatures of other planes. With the knowledge from other planes, their wisdom and insight are undoubtedly the strongest in the eyes of ordinary beings in the soul realm." Grimm nodded silently, understanding the unique way the soul realm operated. 3 days later, as expected, they met the wise man in a thatched hut in an open space in the forest. It was a cheetah with beautiful black fur, but strangely enough, it had 6 claws and a strange hook at the end of its long tail. However, what surprised Grimm the most was the soul shadow floating above its head. The soul shadow was exactly the same as the cheetah's body, just that it was a dozen times smaller. Most of the illusory body's body was exposed outside the head, and only the bottom part was submerged in the head, connecting with the source of its soul. Spirit Pact. This was a level 2 Spirit Pact. Grimm could sense that the strange cheetah in front of him seemed to have signed a soul contract with someone from a faraway plane. The latter could use the power of the contract to summon it from the soul realm to his plane at any time. As the wolves howled, a strange halo appeared beneath Grimm and the other two. In the next second, the world spun, and the whole world spun crazily. When the 3 of them endured the dizziness and survived the chaotic space, they realized that they were already on top of a tall hill. In front of them, a strange swamp that wasn't rich or fertile but was full of vitality appeared. The hill that Grimm and the other 2 were standing on was at the edge of the strange swamp. Behind them was a continuous sea of trees, and after crossing the hill, they entered the wetland swamp. This place still retained the original form of the wetland swamp. The fog was thick and heavy. There were lakes, streams, and quagmires all over the swamp, which was why this place was covered in a thick fog all year round. Within the swamp, there were strange mushrooms that had grown into towering trees everywhere. They were huge. The thick stalks of the mushrooms were so thick that it would take 10 people to wrap their arms around them, and the huge canopy directly disappeared into the fog above the swamp, making it difficult to see their full appearance. Many of the swamp creatures even dug out rooms on the stalks of the mushrooms and lived in them. Strangely shaped mushroom houses rose from the ground, and combined with the unique environment of the wetland swamp, it formed a strange natural landscape. Looking at the strange territory in front of him, Grimm glanced at Amelia. "We're already here, and we're about to fight the enemy. Now you can tell us who our main enemy is." "We're here to obtain the life origin water. According to my memory, this thing has always been in the hands of my Uncle Farnson. So, if we want to obtain the life origin water, we can only kill this Farnson." Grimm said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Master, I have no intention of using you. If we want to obtain the life origin water, we can only kill my Uncle Farnson. Moreover, if you kill him, I'm willing to offer you the demonic fog grass, the soul of nature, and a method to tame the fungus giant." Amelia gritted her teeth and took out her last bargaining chip. Over the years, she had interacted with this legendary master many times, and naturally knew what could move him the most. The demonic fog grass was an extremely rare sorcerer material, even in the sorcerer world. It was the main material for refining the grade for Sleeping Cloud, and it was very valuable. The soul of nature was a naturally condensed elemental soul, and was also the main material for making high-grade sorcerer weapons. It was also a necessity for elemental sorcerers to create elemental incarnations. As for the fungus giants, Grimm had only heard of them from Amelia, but he had never truly experienced their true strength. Therefore, Grim was still a little hesitant about the conditions she proposed. How strong is that Farnson? When I left the Spore Forest, he was only mid-grade 3. Now, he has probably reached high-grade 3. High-grade 3? An enemy like this was worthy of being treated seriously? Grim could not help but look at Amelia with a puzzled expression. Amelia smiled bitterly and explained, "Master, you have to be careful. Our Mospoor clan is not very strong, but once we encounter a strong enemy, we will choose to merge with the fungus giants we have enslaved. At that time, when the strength of the two is combined, they will often jump a grade higher. Therefore, if you don't want to be in trouble, you have to kill them before they merge. Then, don't you have any good news for me?" Grim snapped. Hearing Grim's teasing, Amelia immediately relaxed. She knew that since the master had said so, it meant that he had agreed to her conditions. There's a great news. The creatures that live in the wetlands, whether they are carnivores, flowers, or fungi, are all plants. They're most afraid of fire. That's why they chose to live in a place full of lakes, streams, and waterways. With your strength, you are simply an invincible existence here. That sounds like a piece of good news indeed. All right, the wetlands used to be your home. What do you think we should do next? Go to the dark cave and find Moat. It is the famous sage of this swamp. Only with its support will we not be rejected by the spirit realm when we carry out the slaughter here. Otherwise, any swamp creature we kill will arouse the hatred of the natives, and we won't be able to move an inch. What rank is this Moat? Rank 4. Grim immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. The wetlands was only one of the 12 regions of the Spiriters' realm, and the number of rank 4 creatures here was almost in the double digits. Purely comparing the number of powerful beings, the Spiriters' realm was not inferior to the Magus world. It was also a plain world with its own unique civilization. Even with Grim's strength, he would not dare to do as he pleased in the wetlands where powerful beings gathered. Otherwise, he might end up being surrounded and attacked. After discussing everything, the three of them disguised themselves. In order to avoid being recognized by her enemies, Amelia put on a thick black cloak and hood. She also used a ring of concealment to hide her presence. Grim was still dressed like a magus, and he put Remy on his shoulder. The three of them entered the wetlands, one after the other. Once inside, Grim immediately sighed. The wetlands was indeed the most beautiful and dreamlike of all the swamps he had ever seen. There were vast lakes and interconnected waterways and streams everywhere. The ground was covered in a thick layer of meadow, and an astonishing number of mushrooms and fungi grew there. The air was filled with a unique damp and fragrant gas, and a shocking number of strange spores floated in the air. These spores were only the size of a finger, with a strange tentacle-like cap and a small tail. They floated around in the air, their small bodies reflecting a faint fluorescent light. The whole wetlands looked like a strange, dreamlike paradise. For some reason, these floating spores seemed to be afraid of Remy's existence. Once they were within 10 meters of the three, they would turn around and move to another place. Walking through the wetlands and swamps, there were tall fungal creatures everywhere, flower creatures that could move plant roots and walk upright like humans, and water elementals that wandered aimlessly between the waterways. Although they were quite intelligent, they did not have any complicated thoughts or schemes. All of their actions were still driven by instinct. They ate when they were hungry, slept when they were tired, and ran to the streams or lakes to drink when they were thirsty. Most of the time, they were like the patrollers of this land, roaming freely without any restraints or goals. Chapter 1200. Night fell. The wetland swamp shrouded in darkness had a unique charm to it. Amelia lit a bonfire in an empty space beside the lake and started to cook meat soup in a stew pot. Along with some fresh mushrooms that she had picked, the fragrance of the soup spread far and wide in the damp, foggy swamp. Remy had run off somewhere after dark. Grim was not worried about him at all. After all, he was not called the rank 3 plague poison spirit for nothing. If he really went all out, Remy alone could turn a small area into a wasteland. As for Grim, He arrived at the top of a huge mushroom tree the moment night fell. He sat on the edge of the canopy and observed the unique environment and natural landscape around him, his heart filled with admiration and respect for nature's uncanny workmanship. The heavy and wet fog floated above the swamp, causing the stars in the sky to appear dim and blurry. Within his line of sight, there were many mushroom trees of various sizes, rising and falling like a mushroom forest. Being in this place, one would have the illusion that it was not the mushrooms that had grown bigger, but that they had suddenly shrunk. In a trance, it was as if a human had suddenly turned into an ant, and the wild mushrooms that could be easily crushed before were now towering trees. His own strength seemed so insignificant and powerless. In the mushroom forest, the fluorescent spores were as dense and light as fireflies. They were everywhere at all times. Wherever they floated, they would take root and grow into new mushrooms. Some of the lucky mushrooms would grow extremely large and become part of the vast mushroom forest, while others would be eaten by the wandering fungus giants and swamp creatures as soon as they sprouted. Apart from these fluorescent spores, there were also many enlarged spore bats in the sky above the wetland swamp. They were also feeding on the fluorescent spores, flying around the mushroom canopies and chasing after the free-floating little things. The appearance of these spore bats was similar to that of a stingray. They fluttered their flat bat wings and glided freely in the air. At the end of their long tail wings was a sharp black thorn, which faintly emitted a bitter, poisonous aura. Ordinary spore bats naturally did not dare to provoke Grimm, but there would always be ignorant fools that would come knocking on his door. Thus, when Grimm was enjoying the unique night scenery on top of the giant mushroom canopy that was more than 50 meters high, a rank 2 spore bat discovered him and launched a ferocious attack. It was a spore bat with a strange war spirit. Its bat wings were black, and the surface of its body was covered with brown bristles. Its skin had a good anti-magic property. Its attacks were rather simple, either spitting acid or swooping down to attack with its venomous tail. Such attacks naturally did not pose a threat to Grimm at all. If not for wanting to experience the so-called war spirit, Grimm would have ended the battle in 5 or 6 seconds. The acid spat by Black Wing was evaporated by Grimm's fireballs, and every time it tried to approach Grimm, it would be forced back by the flames. After a few fruitless attempts, the enraged Blackwing finally activated its war spirit ability. A strange spiritual shockwave descended on Grimm's body. It was not very powerful, but the accompanying strange paralysis caused Grimm to freeze on the spot. The strange ability of a rank 3 creature actually ignored magic resistance and took effect on a rank 4 Grimm, and it lasted for quite a while. This strange ability immediately attracted Grimm's attention. While Grimm's eyes were wide open and his body was stiff, the Blackwing quickly glided past him. Taking advantage of the gap between them, the Blackwing suddenly slashed at Grimm's neck with a venomous stinger. But that was all it could do. In the next second, a large hand covered in flames grabbed Blackwing's tail and firmly held him in place. Following that, the flames surged and spread along the tail to Blackwing's entire body. The terrifying burning pain made Blackwing hover between life and death. He struggled with all his might, but he could not escape the grasp of the flaming hand. In Grimm's mind, the AI chip, which had long since returned to normal, finally issued a series of notifications. Mental paralysis, a special ability unique to elite spore bats. During battle, some special scale powder will fall from the surface of its body and silently invade the opponent's body. When necessary, it can be triggered with spiritual force to paralyze the opponent's mind, causing them to lose the ability to resist. So it's not a pure mental ability, but a combination of spiritual force and a special substance, Grimm muttered to himself. He had overestimated himself in today's battle. If he had really treated Blackwing as an opponent, even if he did not use Burning Domain, he would have used Flame Barrier to protect his body. That way, no matter how much scale powder Blackwing scattered, it would all be burned to ashes the moment it entered the barrier. How could it possibly threaten Grimm? However, since Blackwing scale powder could paralyze a rank 4 sorcerer's consciousness. Even if it only lasted for a short period of time, it was still worth investigating. Just as Grimm was about to kill Blackwing, an abnormally old voice suddenly appeared in his mind. Guess from afar, please let this ignorant fellow go. On behalf of the wetland swamp, I sincerely apologize to you. Grimm suddenly turned around. Not far behind him, a strange creature that was only a meter tall was calmly looking at him. If not for the pure natural aura within its body, Grimm might have thought it was just an ordinary creature contaminated by the swamp. Its 1 meter tall body was too small. Its body was covered with dark brown algae and smelly black sludge. Its real face was covered by the messy hair of the algae, making it difficult for people to see through its real body. However, the powerful spiritual pressure of a rank 4 creature was real. You are. With a thought, the flames on the surface of Grimm's black wings were instantly extinguished. However, with such a heavy injury, Blackwing was on the verge of death. Its body drooped down, leaving only its tail in Grimm's hand. Greetings, guest from afar. My name is Moat, the sage of this swamp. So you're Moat. To be honest, we were just about to look for you. Grimm was slightly shocked. He was a little wary of these sages. Guest from afar, before we find a place to talk, do you think it's possible for you to treat Blackwing? Although Moat was small in stature, he spoke in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. He had a convincing air of authority about him. Grimm raised his right hand and looked at Blackwing, which was charred black. He smiled calmly. I'm only good at setting fires, not saving people. If you have a way, I'd like to see what you're capable of. Since you have no objections, leave it to me. Moat's face was hidden under the messy algae, making it impossible to see the changes in his expression. He held a black cane that was half a head taller than him. With a light tap of his foot, a green beam of light shot out from the cane at Blackwing's charred body. Immediately, with a series of crackling sounds of flesh and blood exploding, the scorched skin on the surface of Blackwing exploded and fell off, revealing new skin growing underneath. Blackwing, who was on the brink of death just a moment ago, was suddenly full of vigor. However, due to Grimm's terrifying presence, he remained paralyzed on the ground, not daring to move. Grimm had no choice but to give face to a grade 4 sage who was personally pleading for him. Grimm snorted softly. With a swipe of his right hand, he cut off the stinger on Blackwing's tail. The stinger fell on the mushroom cap and bounced a few times. Blackwing, who was still under Grimm's control, trembled in pain, but he did not dare to struggle too much. Go. Remember to be more careful next time. Don't provoke someone more ruthless than you. Grimm tossed Blackwing aside and kept the stinger in his hand. There were some scales on the surface of the stinger. It was enough to study the powder of the scales. Once released, the grade 3 Blackwing immediately ran away without looking back. His violent and domineering aura was nowhere to be found. The Moat watched all this calmly and did not say a word of objection. Grimm smelled the fragrant meat soup coming from the bottom of a mushroom tree. He smiled and took the initiative to invite Moat. Amelia's meat soup is ready. Lord Moat, why don't you do me the honor of tasting it together? Moat smiled calmly. I'll be troubling you then. Amelia did not seem surprised at the sudden appearance of Moat, the sage of the swamp, in the camp. This was because they had already come into contact with a sage from a small region, and these sages seemed to have some strange way of communicating with each other. Hence, Amelia had long expected that Moat would come to them a day after they entered the wetland swamp. She eagerly served the two of them a seat by the campfire and served them a large bowl of meat soup, along with soft bread and cheese. The three of them ate and drank happily. As they ate and drank, Grimm glanced at the strange-looking sage of the swamp from the corner of his eyes. He could not help but ask, Lord Moat, may I know which race you are from? Truth be told, Grimm had been trying to guess Moat's race ever since he saw him. Unfortunately, all of his guesses were specious and hard to believe. I'm afraid that my race is a little out of your expectations. Moat chuckled. I'm a swamp giant. Swamp giant. A swamp giant that was over a meter tall. Chapter 1201. Along the way, Grimm had seen quite a few swamp giants. They were also humanoid monsters. They were fat and had oversized bodies. They had thick legs and octopus-like upper limbs. Their bodies were densely covered with strange tumor-like things. Adult swamp giants were generally around 10 meters tall, and even young swamp giants were around 3 meters tall. Now, this wise one mote had said that he was also a swamp giant. This was clearly beyond Grimm's understanding. From this, Grimm was even more certain that this wise man mote must be an alien among the swamp giants. Only with such a strange gift could it stand out from the many swamp giants and become the guide, observer, and sage of this huge wetland swamp. After being tongue-tied for a long time, Grimm finally nodded and said, "It seems that you must be an anomaly among the swamp giants. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to reach your current level." Although he was already a grade 4 powerhouse who could look down on most beings in the plane, this wise one mote still lived a simple and ordinary life. Even on his body, Grimm rarely saw the dazzling energy radiance of high-grade equipment. The moss clothes draped over its body and the wooden staff in its hand did not show any signs of gathering energy. There were also no fluctuations of laws unique to high-grade items. It was obvious that they were ordinary items. To put it bluntly, in the sorcerer world, even an ordinary sorcerer acolyte would not be able to be as shabby as it appeared. But on second thought, Grimm expressed that he understood. After all, to successfully create a high-grade item, one needed the support of a vast amount of alchemy theories, as well as many crafting techniques and methods. These things cannot be created by just one or two geniuses. It required generations of individuals to continuously accumulate knowledge. However, the Spiriters' realm obviously did not have any closely related knowledge-gathering system. Wise ones and powerhouses were scattered all over the Spiriters' realm like pearls, but they lacked a thread to connect them and gather them together to form a force. To put it nicely, this was called freedom, but to put it bluntly, it was like a plate of loose sand. It was no wonder that even though he was a Type 4 expert, he still lived a simple and primitive life. The two Type 4 powerhouses gathered around the bonfire, wolfing down the soup made from the fire dragon ribs. The extremely abundant energy aroused Mote's appetite, and he swallowed his portion like a tornado, sweeping away the clouds in its wake. What kind of creature is this? The fire aura inside is actually so strong. Mote ate to his heart's content, and when he burped, he even spat out a ball of fire from his mouth. Awesome. Too awesome. I've never had such a chewy steak in my life. Grade 3 Fire Dragon Meat. Amelia laughed as she stirred the soup with a long iron ladle. This was a fire dragon feast that only our master could enjoy. If not for you, he wouldn't have brought it out today. Fire dragon meat, and it's level 3. Mote could not help but grimace in surprise. In the eyes of the sages of the spirit realm, dragons were terrifying creatures that ruled the skies. Even though Mote the Wise was a Tier 4 dragon, he would definitely lose if he were to challenge a Tier 4 dragon alone. Even if he faced a Grade 3 dragon, he was not confident that he could defeat it. One of the most important reasons was that dragons could fly, and all of them had extremely terrifying dragon breaths. For a land powerhouse like Mote to fight a dragon that soared high in the sky was simply too much. He could not catch up to it, and he could not hit it either. When he thought about how terrifying dragons were, even Mote could not help but shudder. He was the one who ate it, and his hands were the one who ate it. Mote rubbed it for a while, then finally took out a bunch of dried mushrooms from his pocket and threw them into the pot. "Since you're so generous as to treat me with fire dragon meat, I can't be too stingy. These are giant shiitake mushrooms, a specialty of the wetlands. They have a strong and long-lasting fragrance, and are most suitable as condiments. Moreover, eating them over a long period of time is beneficial to a person's physique." "Oh, it's beneficial to the physique?" Hearing this, Grimm could not help but feel excited. Elemental magi with a physique of 32 points could be counted on one's fingers. At this level, it was extremely difficult for one's physique to improve even a little. Of course, if Grimm used the methods of body refinement magi to stimulate his body, there would still be room for improvement. However, many of those methods used spiritual force to stimulate the growth of the physique, and it was not worth it for Grimm. Hence, after hearing about such a strange mushroom, Grimm could not help but pick up a shiitake that had been soaked in the soup and put it into his mouth. The fragrance assailed his nostrils, and it was smooth and refreshing. However, as Grimm closed his eyes to savor it, his spiritual force was focused on the AI chip's report. Beep. Strange high-energy item detected. Edible. The aroma released by the item contains some beneficial stimulation to the body. Estimated that after consumption, the host's physique will improve slightly. To achieve the effect of +1 to host's physique, 100 meals are required. Estimated resistance to the medicinal properties will develop after 210 meals. Grimm looked at the report provided by the AI chip and sucked in a breath of cold air. Didn't this mean that eating the shiitake over a long period of time would increase his physique by 2 points? For a rank 4 fire magus like him, these 2 points of physique were much more beneficial than a 5 to 6 point increase for low-rank magi. If these 2 points could be used on rank 4 body refinement magi, the benefits would be even greater. If the Crimson family were to obtain this resource and market it in the magus world, it would definitely cause rank 4 magi to fight over it. After all, at their level, there were very, very few methods to increase any of their basic attributes by 2 points without terrifying repercussions. Hence, Grimm muttered to himself and could not help but ask, Sage Moat, I wonder if you are willing to trade the seeds of the shiitake? If you are, I can use knowledge or ingredients to exchange for them. This shiitake is a special mushroom that I developed myself. If you only want some finished products, I can give you a batch for free. But if you want the seeds of the giant shiitake, then what? Then you must help me with something. Grimm was not surprised by Sage Moat's suggestion and continued to look at it calmly. What is it? Over the past few years, many small lakes in the wetlands have dried up and turned into terrifying sludge. Many fungus giants, swamp lords, and other creatures living in the wetlands have developed a terrible blight. The bodies of the swamp creatures that contract this disease will show obvious signs of withering, and they will go berserk and attack everything around them. Grimm listened quietly to Moat's introduction, his eyebrows slightly furrowed, as if he was deep in thought. Then you mean, you want me to investigate the cause of the blight on your behalf? Yes, as long as you can find the source of the blight. I will give you the seeds of the shiitake as a reward. If you can help us destroy the source, I have 2 special mushrooms here. One is good for spiritual force, and the other is good for elemental affinity. Grimm sucked in a breath of cold air again, looking at Moat like he was looking at a human-shaped treasure trove. Even a broken ship has 3 pounds of nails. Who would have thought that Sage Moat, who is unprepossessing and even abnormally shabby, would have treasures that could make Grimm's heart palpitate? However, no matter how good the treasures were, they could not interfere with the main purpose of this trip. Grimm pondered for a while, then said, Sage Moat, to tell you the truth, we came to the wetlands for the water of life. Before we obtain the water of life, we do not want to cause too many problems. Water of life? Moat turned to look at Amelia and said indifferently, Could it be that this little girl encouraged you to come here? That's right. The wetlands do have the water of life, and it is preserved in the sacred land of the Mozpor race. If you want the water of life, I'm afraid you will have to face the Mozpor race head-on. Yes. So, before we go to the Spore Forest, I want to hear your opinion. Sage Moat. Moat was silent. After a long time, he said in a low voice, You should have heard on the way here that the wetlands have changed greatly in the past few years. The ones who caused the changes are the Mozpor race's leader, Farnson, the fungus giant lord, Cowax, and other swamp lords. So, accept this mission to investigate the blight disease. With it, you'll be able to enter and exit most areas of the wetlands without being disturbed by the local creatures. If I'm not wrong, I'm afraid this natural disaster in the wetlands is related to some secret actions of the Moe's poor race. After listening to Moat's story, Grimm's eyes lit up. You mean if the blight disease is related to the Moe's poor race, you're willing to take action? Not just me. Moat angrily slammed his wooden staff. I also contacted the Hydra King Mordig and the leader of the spore bats, Moses. Chingy, as long as you can produce enough evidence, I will personally drive these bastards out of the wetlands. Chapter 1202. Spirit Realm, Wetland Swamp. Kolifong Cave. This was a large body of water in the northwest corner of the wetland swamp. Some called it a lake, while others called it a sea. However, from Grimm's point of view, it was more accurate to call it an internal sea. Grimm was riding a large spore bat, flying 30 to 40 meters above the ground. He followed the meandering flow of the streams and rivers, heading towards the area with the densest mist. This is the Nicean waterway. Most of the inhabitants here are fishmen and lobstermen. They aren't very sociable and are always at war with each other. The giant spore bat was also a level 2 creature. It had high intelligence, and its attitude towards Grimm was a lot more respectful than the others of its kind. After listening to the girl's introduction, Grimm curiously extended his head and looked down. Between the tall mushroom trees, a huge waterway that was more than 100 meters wide flowed quietly below him. Every once in a while, a narrow stream would be drawn from the waterway, forming a shallow puddle in a certain area. The small merman's village was built on the shallow puddles, and all of them were simple and crude wooden houses on the water. When the spore-flying bats flew across the sky above the Murloc village, from time to time, one could see those ugly dark green silhouettes chasing after the spore-flying bats while screaming. What kind of mermen are they? Black-finned fishmen or ink-spewing fishmen? Blue light flickered in Grimm's eyes, and he quickly recorded the appearance and body characteristics of these mermen into his database. He then quickly compared them. The AI. Chip's feedback showed that the probability of black-finned fishmen was 67%, ink-spewing fishmen was 25%, tide summoner fishmen was 7%. The probability of the other mermen was lower than 1%, so it was not displayed. They're black-finned fishmen. The spore bat flapped its wings as it flew between the tall mushroom trees. It turned its head and replied, "You magi are all powerful and knowledgeable indeed. You even know about these inconspicuous little fellows like black-finned fishmen." Grimm didn't pay too much attention to the giant spore bat's compliments. He looked into the distance at the tall figures standing on the small islands in the middle of the river. They were simply enlarged versions of lobsters. They stood upright like humans, walking with the 4 limbs and webbed duck-like tails under their flat abdomens. They fought and intimidated their enemies with their 2 strong pincers. Compared to the little fishmen, the lobstermen were much stronger and more ferocious. Their bodies were also covered in a layer of thick scales, and there was a layer of strange moss growing on the scales. With such protection, the little fishmen's crude spears would either not be able to cut through the scales or slip on the moss, making it difficult for them to cause any serious damage. It was no wonder that the lobstermen would occupy the best hunting position in the middle of the waterway, while the little fishmen were chased to the more remote areas. And their food was the numerous small fish in the waterway. They watched as the little fishmen chased after the giant spore bats, screaming as they threw their spears into the air. The spears fell down powerlessly, injuring many of their companions by accident. "They don't seem to have a good relationship with you?" Grimm asked. "My tribesmen would come here to eat 1 or 2 little fishmen when they got tired of eating mushrooms. That's why our relationship has always been tense." The giant spore bat explained simply. It seemed to recall the taste of the little fishman's delicious flesh, and it couldn't help but grin. "Didn't the wise one stop your killing?" "Killing? No. This is not killing, but hunting. The little fishman's reproductive ability is too strong. If we don't restrict them, they will fill every inch of the wetland with their green bodies. That's why we eat the little fishmen. The little fishmen eat the smaller aquatic creatures, and the aquatic creatures eat the sand. This is a privilege given to us by the laws of the plane. Even the most respected wise ones couldn't take it away. Hearing the spore bat's answer, Grim couldn't help but nod. In the Magus world, many of the Grade 2 creatures in the Dark Forest were still ignorant and primitive. However, this ordinary Grade 2 spore bat from the spirit world already had such an understanding. This wasn't just pure intelligence, but knowledge and experience that could only be obtained after experiencing the world. Lord Magus, please sit tight. We're about to pass through the death quagmire. The creatures there aren't friendly recently. Following the giant spore bat's loud warning, its body quickly spiraled and passed through a small mound, suddenly barging into a strange land. Grim, who had been sitting quietly on the spore bat's back, suddenly stood up. His sharp eyes scanned the strange land in front of him in bewilderment. Perhaps not long ago, this place used to be a vast and beautiful lake. However, with the passage of time, the lake's water flowed elsewhere for some unknown reason. Thus, large patches of black and sticky lake bed were exposed, turning the place into a death quagmire filled with a terrifying stench. Due to the changes in the environment, the swamp creatures that had lost their habitat began to go berserk and fight for the remaining water in the low-lying areas. For this last bit of water, all the swamp creatures were caught in a killing spree. Grim gazed into the distance and could see countless broken shells and limbs in the black mud at the bottom of the lake. Those that could survive such a cruel and bloody battle were all terrifying beings, especially the swamp giants, the fungus giants, and the nine-headed snake monster. However, even though they were the victors, they didn't have enough water to nourish their bodies. They could only drag their withered bodies forward in the death quagmire that spanned tens of miles, looking for the remaining water. Death quagmire. This was indeed the death quagmire. Wait for me up there. I'll go get some specimens. Grim said to the giant spore bat and jumped down from the sky. A height of more than 40 meters was nothing to Grim. He didn't even cast a slow fall spell on himself. He fell like a meteor into the mud at the bottom of the lake. A dull thud sounded. Mud splattered everywhere, and waves of fire rolled. Before the jet-black and smelly sludge could even land on the ground, it was swept away by the scarlet waves of fire and instantly evaporated into nothingness. Grim's body only had to crouch slightly to reduce the terrifying impact of falling from such a high altitude. If it was someone else falling without any buffer, even if they didn't have their bones crushed, their internal organs would have suffered a terrible impact. Grim Gundam's 32 points of vitality was on full display at this moment. The recoil that would have been fatal to others was only a slight dizziness to him, and his body did not suffer any internal injuries at all. He slowly straightened his body and walked out of the mud that had been baked into a hard lump of mud. His powerful descent was so shocking that it naturally attracted the attention of a few tall figures in the surroundings. Seeing his majestic body covered in flames, the withered swamp giant closest to him immediately roared and rushed over. A mere Grade 2 swamp giant actually dared to take the initiative to charge at a Grade 4 sorcerer. From this almost suicidal behavior, it could be seen that the withering disease had not only damaged its body, but even its brain had become a little muddled. Grim coldly snorted. He held his staff in his left hand and stretched out his right hand, palm facing the enemy. One after another, fireballs bombarded the swamp giant's body. Grim was only 2 meters tall, while the withered swamp giant was about 7 meters tall. However, under the terrifying fire spell, the swamp giant was not only unable to take a step forward, but was also forced back by the fireballs. Its entire body began to crack and disintegrate. The swamp giant's tall and mighty body contained a tenacious and long life force. Even if a third of its body was damaged, it could still regrow with its own life force. It was precisely by relying on this tenacious life that they were able to endure the several years of dry season and survive to this day. However, no matter how long and tenacious its life force was, it was useless in the face of a terrifying legendary fire wizard. With only 5 fingers and 7 fireballs, Grim blasted the withered swamp giant into pieces, turning it into a pool of blood on the ground. The swamp giant's broken body emitted specks of fluorescent light that slowly blended into the fog that covered the sky and covered the earth. However, Grim furrowed his brows and reached out to grab a ball of faint black smoke from thin air. Grim's flame power condensed into a fireball, sealing the black smoke inside. Some of the black smoke that was in a hurry to escape crashed into the inner wall of the fireball and were instantly incinerated by the flames. The remaining black smoke seemed to know how powerful it was and did not dare to approach the inner wall of the fireball. It was like a group of headless flies rushing around randomly as if it was looking for a way out. The planar laws of the spiritual realm are too powerful, aren't they? Even the black smoke has intelligence. Grim smiled coldly, gathering power in his eyes. Blue light flickered as he quickly scanned the black smoke. Beep. Discovered a foreign virus. Warning, this virus is terrifyingly contagious and fatal. It can cause a grade 3 disease to invade the host. Suggested host to activate the flame barrier to prevent infection. As expected, the moment he saw the black smoke, Grim felt a sense of familiarity. As expected, the AI chip scan confirmed his suspicions. The so-called wilting disease was actually an invasion by a special kind of bacteria. Some of them had clearly withered limbs, and their bodies were also surrounded by a swarm of frightening flies that couldn't be removed. The other creatures also avoided the blight infected, not daring to get close to them. Boss, do you have a way to hide us? I guess we'll be able to watch a good show soon. Remy's Peppa Pig face revealed a sinister smile. Grim waved his hand, and a ring of fire engulfed the two of them. As the flames spread, the two of them suddenly disappeared on the spot. In the middle of a strange golden flame, Remy curiously looked around and at his own body. His eyes seemed to be covered by a layer of bright red gauze. Everything he saw seemed to be distorted and not as real as before. This is one of the laws of fire you've mastered. It really is amazing. Remy looked around with envy, even running to a staggering fungus giant and baring his fangs and claws until he was sure it couldn't see him. What are we waiting for? Grim asked. Waiting for a good show to start. Remy grinned. The virus-causing bacteria have been deliberately castrated, so it can only spread through direct contact. It seems they don't want a bacteria to spread endlessly. So what? So if they want to infect an area, the best way is to poison it. Only then can they control the infected in the desired area and not let it spread to themselves. When will they come? Soon? At least the smell of the bacteria in the infected's body is from the last few days. Well, let's wait. The wait was long, but it was very valuable. Remy went to collect the vomit and excrement of the infected, while Grim began to collect some strange local spores and all kinds of strange mushrooms. He could feel that the unique climate and environment of the wetland swamp had something to do with these strange mushrooms. Some of the mushrooms contained content that even Grim was interested in. Just as the two of them were busy and excited, an inconspicuous and wretched figure sneaked into the area. This was a male spore man that was less than half a meter tall. He had a protruding mouth and monkey cheeks. He had shifty eyes and a sneaky look. It carried a bulging leather bag on its back as it carefully sneaked into Grim's perception range. Logically speaking, with the weak aura of this spore man, it would have been torn into pieces by the berserk swamp creatures before it could even get close to the center of the swamp. However, it sneaked in unscathed, as if it was not attacked at all. The reason was very simple. This male spore man also had a stench unique to the blight, which attracted the swamp creatures to avoid it. But no matter how Grim observed and scanned, he did not find any signs of atrophy of the blight on the male spore man. After looking around and finding nothing out of the ordinary, he cautiously approached a staggering fungus giant and took out a white mushroom the size of a fist from the pouch on his back and threw it at it. The white mushroom kept rolling on the ground and finally attracted the fungus giant's attention. As if it had sensed the fragrance of the white mushroom, the fungus giant lunged at it like a madman. It used its thick tentacles to grab the white mushroom and threw it into its mouth. After a while, the fungus giant that had eaten the white mushroom trembled and roared desperately. On its body, the originally strong muscles began to wither at a speed visible to the naked eye. A large swarm of black flies swarmed out of its mouth and circled around it. Seeing that the fungus giant had fallen for its trick, the shifty-eyed spore man immediately sneaked to the second target not far away. However, just as it was about to take out another white mushroom and do the same thing, a faint male voice suddenly came from behind it, giving it a big fright. "Who told you to do this?" The spore man turned around and saw Grim slowly emerging from the void. Grim was dressed like a human wizard, but he did not have any terrifying magical fluctuations. His appearance was no different from an ordinary human. However, the spore man was obviously not ignorant and could naturally tell that Grim was not an ordinary person. Coupled with the fact that what it was doing was an ugly thing that could not be exposed to the public, it was so frightened that it jumped 3 feet high and turned around, planning to escape. However, with its weak strength of a high-level apprentice, it wanted to escape from the hands of a legendary fire wizard. Such a thought was undoubtedly ridiculous. With a snap of his fingers, a ring of fire suddenly appeared under the spore man's feet. Congealed flame shackles extended from the ring and tightly bound the spore man, making it difficult for it to move. Grim stepped lightly on the soft mud and came to the spore man's side. He waved his right hand in front of the spore man's eyes, and a small golden flame condensed on the tip of his index finger. The spore man was in a great panic, and its attention was instantly attracted by the small flame. When its eyes were fixed on the small flame, its entire mind and thoughts also fell into a state of stagnation, and it could no longer organize effective thinking and response. Bewitching. It was just an extremely simple fire spell. Where did you come from? Why did you come here to poison? Where did you make these carriers? Grim asked without hesitation. Magic Pod Cavern. Magic Pod Cavern. Magic Pod Cavern. For some reason, the spore man's mind was no longer working. Apart from repeatedly repeating the words Magic Pod Cavern, it could not remember anything else. Lord Moat, how do you think we should deal with this matter? Grim asked a few times, but could not get any other answers. He could only turn his head and communicate with a strange eyeball attached to his shoulder blade. Through the eye of nature, Moat, who was hundreds of miles away, also saw the whole process of Grim capturing the spore man and feeding it. The swamp sage was obviously in an extremely bad mood, and his voice was filled with a strong killing intent when he spoke through the eye of nature. The Magic Pod Cavern is the holy land of the Mose Poor tribe. There are terrifying traps and many guards there. Even my spiritual will can't reach in. Judging from the current signs, these carriers were created by the Mose Poor tribe in the Magic Pod Cavern. Their goal is to force other tribes and creatures out of the wetland swamp. These bastards, they've gone too far this time. Then you mean, as an outsider, Grim naturally did not care about the life or death of the creatures here. However, when he heard Moat say that the Magic Pod Cavern was the holy land of the Mose Poor tribe, he suddenly had an idea. He was a little eager. Get the spore bats to send this spore man and the carriers back. I'll contact the 9-headed python king and the flying bat leader and discuss with them about expelling the Mose Poor tribe. In the meantime, if you can produce more evidence, I will not hesitate to mobilize the entire wetland swamp's power to deal with the Mose Poor tribe. When that time comes, you will naturally be able to get the life source water after attacking the Mose Poor tribe's holy land. Chapter 1204. The wetland swamp was huge and rich in species. Due to the special environment, all sorts of strange creatures and plants were nurtured. But in terms of numbers, the strange spores that filled the sky were undoubtedly the most numerous. According to the AI chip's scanning and detection, the gene fragments of the spores could be detected in all the creatures in the wetland swamp. To put it bluntly, the ecosystem of the wetland swamp was formed by the infection and combination of numerous spores and various plants and animals. And the source of these spores came from a mushroom forest that was everywhere in the wetland swamp. The mushrooms grew and became the residence and food of all sorts of swamp creatures. Meanwhile, a mature mushroom would release thousands of strange spores, spreading its genetic attributes to various places. There were too many types of mushrooms and too many spores with different genes. They parasitized and infected all the plants and animals in the wetland swamp, giving birth to all sorts of strange magical creatures and plants. Originally, this was an abnormally slow and peaceful mutation process, but with the involvement of the Mozpor race, this process seemed to gradually accelerate. The Mozpor race was insignificant. They did not have strong bodies, mighty divine strength, and magical abilities. They were originally an inconspicuous and inferior race in the wetland swamp. The Mozpor race was extremely powerful. They used the spore forest to breed an astonishing number of parasitic spores, and then mix them into the unique mushroom system of the wetland swamp. The spore system, slowly infecting the surrounding powerful races. In the 300 years that the Mozpor race lived in the wetland swamp, they infected a large number of fungus giants, many swamp lords, and even a powerful ogre tribe. These tribes that were infected by the mutated spores became the servants of the Mozpor race, loyally protecting them. Hence, even if they sensed that something was wrong, the powerful beings in the wetland swamp would find it difficult to pass through these servants' territories to find trouble with the Mozpor race. As the relationships and situation were too complicated, even with Grimm's brain, he had to spend a lot of effort to sort out the current situation of the wetland swamp. Of course, there was no lack of inside information that Amelia had secretly passed to him. After all, half of Amelia's soul memories came from the Mozpor princess. Although this guy lost in the internal strife of the Mozpor clan and left his homeland, his memories still retained many top secrets of the clan. Among them, the topographic map of the Magic Pod Cave and the information about the experts of the Mozpor tribe were the focus of Grimm's attention. The patriarch of the Mozpor clan, who was Amelia's uncle, Finson, was just a grade 3 nobody. However, the fungus giant it had chosen to fuse with was a bona fide tier 4 monster. Hence, if they were to fight, they would have to treat him as a terrifying type 4 powerhouse. Other than the fungus giant, Farnson also half roped in and half enslaved a powerful swamp lord, Crash. This was also a tier 4 upper-rank swamp lord. It possessed frightening power and a tenacious vitality that could cause one to despair. Apart from that, Farnson could also mobilize the chief of the Onloss ogre tribe, Gorphus, who was also a terrifying grade 4 monster. In terms of strength, there were a total of 8 grade 4 monsters in the wetland swamp, and 3 of them belonged to the Mozpor clan. Although the remaining 5 could still form a numerical advantage, they were like a plate of loose sand that could not be truly united. Fortunately, there was the swamp sage, Moat, who was the middleman to contact them, allowing the Anti-Mozpor alliance to have a core. As for Grimm, due to Amelia's position and the life source water, he was naturally biased towards the Anti-Mozpor alliance. In the following period of time, Grimm went to a few more areas ravaged by the blight and captured sporemen who went out to feed. As the evidence became more and more conclusive, the leaders and powerhouses of the other tribes who received the news finally became furious. On the 17th day after Grimm's group entered the wetland swamp, a terrifying internal war finally broke out. The once tranquil and peaceful wetland swamp had now become a battlefield. Every moment in the dark and treacherous mushroom forest, one could see and hear the angry roars and battles of different species and forms of swamp creatures. Grimm led Remy through a dimly lit giant mushroom tree. Just as they turned around a small mound, they bumped into a group of swamp creatures who were fighting in a frenzy. On one side, there were 3 tall and burly swamp giants whose movements were staggering. They were all more than 7 meters tall, and their bodies were as thick and sturdy as a large black bear. However, the sharp claws on their upper limbs had been replaced by thick, long whips of tentacles, and the surface of their bodies was covered in greenish-gray moss and lichens. Occasionally, many white cysts could be seen. They were obviously on the side of the Anti-Mozpor alliance. On the other side, there were more than 20 similarly tall and burly Onloss ogres. The ogres were generally only 3 to 4 meters tall and could barely reach the waist of the swamp giants. However, there were many of them, and they were well trained, unlike the ogres of other worlds who appeared to be stupid and inflexible. The ogres also seemed to have a rather reasonable combination of classes. At the front, there were 7 or 8 ogre warriors wielding wooden shields blocking the charge and whip of the 3 swamp giants. In the middle, there were more than 10 ogre barbarian warriors wielding stone hammers or maces, madly attacking the swamp giants. At the back of the ogres stood 2 tall shaman priests. They would either throw a ball of red mist at the ogre warriors or barbarian warriors to boost their fighting spirit, or throw crimson fireballs at the swamp giants, causing them to roar in anger and scorch their bodies. The swamp giants, consisting of 2 grade 2 and 1 grade 1, were actually forced to retreat by a group of grade 1 ogres, looking like they were about to be defeated. Grim leaned on his staff and stood not far away, silently observing the battlefield. No one knew what he was thinking. Beside him, Remy, who had the appearance of a Peppa Pig, was observing both sides of the battlefield with malicious intent. Seeing outsiders approaching the battlefield, the ogre barbarian closest to Grim roared angrily, raising a huge stone hammer that was a meter in diameter and rushing over. With its huge body and heavy stone hammer, every time it stepped on the ground, the earth would tremble slightly. Thump, 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 thump. The heavy footsteps sounded just like the low sound of war drums being beaten by humans. Since they had the upper hand in the battle, the 2 ogre shaman priests standing at the back of the team inadvertently turned their gazes over. When they saw that the target of their companion's charge was a skinny fellow less than 2 meters tall, they could not help but grin foolishly. Although they were not weak in intelligence, there was still a long way to go before they could develop true intelligence. Knowledge needed to be accumulated, but intelligence could be passed on. Creatures with large heads could not be called intelligent creatures. But in the next moment, the 2 ogre shaman priests could not help but exclaim in surprise. In the distance, that inconspicuous small human raised his wooden staff and shot out 5 blazing fireballs with shocking energy waves in one breath. The first ogre barbarian was sent flying by the fireballs before he could even reach Remy. His body exploded into a cloud of blood mist as the fireballs landed on the ground. The entire battlefield suddenly fell silent. Both sides stopped what they were doing and turned to look at the remains of the ogre barbarian that had been devoured by the flames. Grade 4. He's an ogre shaman priest at the back of the battlefield cried out in surprise. But before he could finish his sentence, the small human in the distance suddenly disappeared. Then, he was shocked to find that the human was already beside him. Although he was not as tall as the ogre warriors and barbarians, the shaman priest was not a kind person. He swung the thick wooden staff in his hand at the human. From a sound of the wind, even though the wooden staff could not compare to a stone staff or a hammer, it could still break the bones of an ordinary swamp creature if it was swung in a circle. But it was a pity that his opponent was a terrifying legendary fire shaman. Grim did not even need to use his fire spell. He only needed to touch the shaman's staff lightly, and the flames in the shaman's body were instantly ignited. In the next second, the body of the shaman priest that had been swinging the wooden staff majestically just a moment ago burst into flames. Flames shot out from its mouth, nostrils, ears, and even from all the pores on its skin, causing it to burn into a huge, human-shaped torch in the shortest time possible. He howled in pain, his eyes burnt blind as he ran around frantically in a helpless manner. When the flames in his body were exhausted, the flames on his body were extinguished. His body was charred black and withered like a piece of charcoal. He fell to the ground with a thud, no longer breathing. He was still alive when the flames were burning, but he was dead when the flames were extinguished. Sometimes the world was so strange. The remaining shaman looked at Grim in fear. When he realized that Grim was looking at him, he immediately covered his head and ran away. But before he could take 2 steps, a scarlet ray shot out from Grim's eyes, slicing through his legs. Wherever the crimson ray passed, a deep scorch mark was left on the ground. The shaman's legs were severed at the knees. He fell to the ground and howled in pain. Not even the 2 Tier 1 shaman priests were a match for Grim. Seeing how easily he had killed them, the remaining ogres dared not approach the swordsman. They screamed in fear and immediately scattered in all directions. Chapter 12:05. Although Grim had helped the 3 swamp giants chase away the ogres as an ally, the 3 swamp giants did not treat Grim well. But after the Onros ogres were gone, the 3 swamp giants did not treat Grim well. If not for Grim flashing the whip hair left behind by the swamp sage, the swamp giants would have even charged at him. The inflexible and inflexible nature of the swamp creatures could be seen from this. The leader of the 3 swamp giants approached Grim and sniffed the whip hair before speaking in a deep and sonorous voice. "This is the scent of the swamp sage. Looks like you are indeed our ally. Tell me, little one, how are you going to deal with these annoying ogres?" "Attack. Of course we're going to attack." Grim smiled helplessly. These Onros ogres are helping the Mose Pores in their evil deeds, so of course we're going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. What's more infuriating and painful than destroying their nest? You're going to attack Stonehammer Camp? There are thousands of Onros ogres there. The leader of the swamp giants showed a trace of surprise on his mossy face, but he quickly became excited. "You're to our liking. Although the swamp sage is intelligent, it's too indecisive. We should have used our strength long ago to chase those troublemakers out of the wetlands. If you really intend to attack the ogres, count me in. Swamp Giant Angwar is willing to follow in your footsteps. Swamp Giant Triple X is willing to follow in your footsteps. Swamp Giant Triple X is willing to follow in your footsteps." Grim did not expect that his shameless war speech would resonate so strongly with the 3 swamp giants. The 3 swamp giants were willing to become his allies in the war. Since they had already said so much, Grim, who had the intention of stirring up a storm in the wetlands, did not hesitate to accept. Grim and Remy led the 3 swamp giants to cross ponds and waterways, approaching the so-called Stonehammer encampment step by step. In the process, Angor the swamp giant let out all sorts of low and melodious cries. As they advanced, more and more swamp giants rushed over from the depths of the wetlands. When they arrived at the entrance of Stonehammer Camp, Grim had already gathered a team of 12 swamp giants behind him. Among them, the strongest was a Grade 3 swamp giant, Terret, while the rest were all Grade 1 and Grade 2 giants. The team stopped not far from the Stonehammer Camp, surveying the opposite side from afar. By human standards, this so-called Stonehammer Camp did not live up to its name. There wasn't even a simple wooden wall, let alone a tall and sturdy city wall. There were only mushrooms in the wetlands and swamps. It was extremely difficult to find suitable wood for construction. Therefore, the Stonehammer Camp in front of them was nothing more than a highland surrounded by ponds and waterways. The ogres used simple stone pillars that were 5 meters tall and half a meter thick to encircle their camp. There was a pole every 10 meters, and there were no obstructions in the middle. It could be said to be extremely simple and crude. The ogres had long since received news of the arrival of the swamp giants. A large number of ogres stood on the high shore, forming a thick human wall, ready to resist the invasion of the swamp giants. In fact, with the quantity and quality of the Anj Rosh ogres, the moment they heard that the swamp giants were heading towards Stonehammer Camp, they had planned to rush out like a swarm of bees and fight to the death with the giants. However, when the higher-ups of the ogres found out that there was a terrifying high-ranked human magus among the swamp giants, they used their authority to suppress the uprising of their clansmen and decided to place the battle at the edge of the camp. However, from Grim's point of view, the concerns of the higher-ups of the ogres were completely unnecessary. With such simple and crude city defenses, there was no difference between defending and attacking in the wild. Rather than that, it was better to take the initiative and attack. At the very least, they would have more room to maneuver strategically. Although there were many swamp giants present, in terms of respect for Grim, only the Grade 3 Terret was the most obvious. As for the other swamp giants, They only chose to follow Grimm out of courtesy or blind obedience. There was no other reason other than the difference in their understanding of power. The Grade 3 swamp giants had already touched upon the upper limits of their strength and experienced the terror of the power of laws. When faced with a Grade 4 magus from another plane, they could put themselves in his shoes and estimate his strength. Ordinary giants, on the other hand, had not broken away from their habits as lowly creatures. They liked to judge a creature's strength based on their size and muscular development. Lord Grimm, how do you think we should fight this battle? Our side seems a little weak. Tarot was evidently a swamp giant who was good at thinking and learning. He crouched down and used a loud, buzzing voice to communicate with Grimm. However, his companions did not seem to agree with his point of view and began to make a ruckus, especially the Grade 1 giants. Just fight casually. There's no need to be so serious. Having experienced more than 10 bloody and cruel planar wars, Grimm didn't really care about these small scenes. To put it bluntly, this could not even be called a war and could only be described as a fierce fight between two villages. We're not alone and without help. When the battle starts, Moat and the others will come to support us. But Tara was obviously still worried. What? Are you afraid? If you swamp giants are afraid, then stay behind. I'll send my flaming creatures to fight. Grimm said coldly. Afraid? Lord Grimm, please take back your words. We swamp giants are not afraid, even in the face of death. For us swamp giants, death means returning to the embrace of the swamp mother. Our souls will never be extinguished. Evidently agitated by Grimm's words, Tarot thumped his chest loudly, as if his reputation had been insulted. Then show me your swamp giant's bravery. Show me how strong you are. Don't worry, I'll send my flaming army to help you. Grimm was already dissatisfied with the swamp sage's procrastination. Alice was anxiously waiting for the water of life, and he did not have much time to waste in this foreign world. Hence, compared to the experienced and meticulous higher-ups of the swamp tribe, Grimm was much more aggressive and unyielding. Anyway, the wetlands were not his territory, and even if they were destroyed, someone else would come and take over. Hence, he did not have any qualms or worries, and had the intention to start a huge battle immediately. Grimm looked around and saw many tall and burly figures huddled together. It was difficult to find a so-called Grade 4 ogre chieftain Gorfus. Therefore, Grimm gave up on searching and focused on the battle. After waving goodbye to Tarot, Grimm walked towards the battlefield step by step with his wizard staff in hand. As he advanced step by step, his body underwent rapid changes. Flames spewed out of his skinny body, causing his body to swell with every step he took. When he was 100 meters away from the Angros ogre camp, his entire body had expanded into a terrifying flame giant surrounded by ferocious flames. When his half-meter-thick flaming legs stomped on a muddy plateau, a formless field of flames and terrifying heat began to spread in all directions. The muddy soil immediately became dry and hard, and the moss, lichens, and colorful mushrooms growing on it began to crack and burn under the high temperature. Even the ponds and swamps around the muddy shore began to emit hot steam, and the dirty muddy water inside began to boil. Both sides looked at the terrifying flame giant that had suddenly appeared with fear in their eyes. They could feel the terrifying flame fluctuations within his body that could shake one's soul. Everyone's heart could not help but pound wildly. This was the first time they had experienced the terror of a high-ranked human magus. Scythe of Flames, first form of contract. Flaming Gate. As the short and deep incantation echoed on the battlefield, a strange gate made of pure flames slowly appeared in front of the flame giant. Then, as the flame giant's wizard staff established a path of fire with the flaming gate, surging flame energy continuously flowed into it. The flaming gate tore through space, summoning a large army of flame from the distant fire elemental plane. The flame gate opened, and countless fire creatures poured out. There were low-level fire creatures like the fire spirit, fire giant, fire hound, and fire bat. There were also mid-level fire creatures like the body incineration flame spirit, fire giant, molten core giant, and flame spirit. Of course, Grimm also saw the undying bird, the flame demon, and the flame lord among the horde of flame creatures. At the same time, a deep and resounding voice sounded in Grimm's mind. The quality of the flame energy you've offered is not bad. As an equivalent exchange, I can lend you my flame army for a while. Remember, I don't care if all the low-ranked flame creatures are destroyed, but if you lose even one of these flame lords, you'll have to compensate me with 100 units of flame energy. Are you willing? Grimm's heart skipped a beat. He could sense that the person who was connected to his soul was at least a grade 5 flame lord. In fact, at their level, they could already be called the Flame Monarch. Since the other party was willing to take the initiative to express their goodwill, Grimm naturally had to reciprocate. The two people behind the scenes communicated briefly through the flaming gate, exchanging fire imprints and then disconnecting. Chapter 1206. In fact, the wetlands and swamps weren't suitable as a battlefield for the flaming creatures. But with a fire-type expert like Grimm around, any unfavorable environment could be turned around with his terrifying strength. Seeing that the battle was about to erupt, Grimm raised his hands high, and a large-scale meteor shower was completed in the blink of an eye. Meteors wrapped in scarlet magma pierced through the thick fog and appeared before everyone's eyes, dragging long tails of black smoke as they fell from the sky. Their landing points naturally overturned nearly half of the ogre camp, forcing the low-tier ogres to raise their wooden shields to protect their heads. But the meteors that landed quickly left deep pits in the ground, the violent flame shockwaves throwing many ogres to the ground. The magma that splattered in all directions caused the ogres to wail like ghosts and howl like wolves. The entire ogre frontline seemed to have turned into a terrifying lava hell in an instant. The Ange Rosh ogres had powerful physiques and frightening strength. Coupled with the fact that there were over 1,000 of them, they formed a frightening force. But such a force was nothing in the eyes of a legendary rank 4 fire shaman. If not for the ogre chieftain, Grimm would have been able to annihilate them all by himself. How terrifying was a legendary rank fire shaman when he went all out. On the battlefield, a legendary rank 4 fire shaman was like a demon king. His every move, and even a small fire spell, could cause terrifying damage to his enemies. With so many flame cannon fodder at the front and Grimm's one slaughter, the 12 swamp giants were under almost negligible pressure. Most of them gathered around Grimm, cleaning up any ogre that tried to destroy the fire gate. At the front line, the flaming creatures summoned from the fire elemental plane had gathered into a torrent and were locked in battle with the ogre warriors. The ordinary flaming creatures that were too small were simply cannon fodder. Affected by the humid environment, their combat power plummeted. Just as these little fellows approached the battlefield, they were smashed into smithereens by the stone hammers and stone clubs of the ogre warriors. When their flaming bodies shattered, the sparks scattered and burned the ogre warriors to a certain degree. However, the ogres had thick skin and flesh, and such injuries would only make them more frenzied. It wouldn't affect their fighting prowess. Only the mid-tier fire creatures could deal terrifying damage to the ogre warriors by relying on their almost materialized flaming bodies and indefensible fire abilities. Moreover, it wasn't the flame creature's true body that passed through the flaming gate, but only the projection of its power. Thus, they became even more ferocious and fearless. Once the projection's flame power was about to be exhausted, they would explode on the spot without hesitation, causing more damage to the enemy and causing more trouble. As a result, ear-piercing explosions could be heard from time to time at the front lines of the battlefield. Wherever the flaming shock waves swept out, one could see piles of charred human skeletons and human-shaped torches that had been set ablaze. Tragic. The battle was abnormally tragic. However, this was the home ground of the ogres, and the ponds and swamps half a mile away from the camp became the most hated battlefield for the fire creatures. Most of their power was used to fight against the moisture here, while the rest could be used to vent on the detestable creatures. The greatest damage to the ogres was caused by Grimm's fire spells. Be it the meteor shower, the volcano of doomsday, or the molten world, their might was terrifying and their range was astonishing. Their lethality was unprecedented. Even though the Anj Rosh ogres were known for their thick skin and tenacious vitality, they could only accept their status as weaklings in front of Grimm. Seeing the strong ogre warriors and barbarian soldiers fall in the sea of flames and the familiar figures being burnt to charcoal, the ogre chief Gorfus hiding among the troops roared furiously, but it was to no avail. With the hordes of fire creatures blocking the way, along with the dozen swamp giants protecting them, the number of ogre warriors who could reach the flaming gate could be counted on one hand. The ogres who were stuck on the battlefield had to endure wave after wave of attacks from the flames, their cries of agony before they died heart-wrenching. Gorfus, the human magus, is a helper that Mode invited. It's said that he's a legendary rank 4 fire magus, and he can't be underestimated. Try to delay him. Clatch, and I will be there soon. When that time comes, we'll work together to capture him. You can do whatever you want with him. Hurry. Move faster. That damned bastard is slaughtering my people without the slightest scruple. My people are dying every moment here, and yet you're still making sarcastic remarks from 1,000 miles away. No, I must stop him. No. Gorfus, you can't step onto the battlefield. From what I see, the human magus wants to lure you out and kill you alone. You'll die if you step out. I don't believe it. He's only a rank 4 magus, and I'm also at rank 4. There's nothing for me to fear. Hurry over as soon as possible. Perhaps by the time you arrive, I'll have already ripped off his head and drank his blood. Just as Golfus' mind was in a mess, Grimm summoned another gigantic meteor from afar, which fell from the sky with a loud roar. The previous meteor shower was only a meter in diameter, but it was able to deal terrifying damage to the ogres within its range. And now this huge meteorite was at least 20 meters in diameter. As it streaked across the sky and fell, the friction with the air left a scorching trail behind it. Wherever it passed, even the void of the plane began to tremble uneasily. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The damage that such a terrifying meteor could cause to the ogres was unimaginable. Thus, Gorfus could not take it anymore. He roared and charged out of the formation. The moment he stepped onto the battlefield, Gorfus roared furiously, and the stone hammer in his right hand danced like the wind as he swung it with all his might. 2 fireballs, one large and one small, rapidly approached each other in the air, followed by an earth-shattering boom. The falling meteorite was smashed into pieces by the stone hammer and turned into fiery meteors, flying in all directions. The stone hammer that was tumbling and falling actually disappeared under Gorfus's grasp. When it reappeared, it was already in Gorfus's right hand. In this process, Grimm unexpectedly felt a trace of law undulations. This ogre chief's control over the laws of the plane is a little strange. He can retrieve a weapon that was thrown out. Thinking about it, this power of law was of little value to magi who had a large number of long-range spells. But for those melee combatants who lacked long-range methods, it was a decent law ability. At the very least, with this method, even the foolish ogre chieftain could temporarily play the role of a cannoneer. After smashing the meteor with one strike, Gorfus stood in the middle of the battlefield with his twin hammers in his hands. His triangular green beady eyes glared at Grimm fiercely, flashing with intense hatred. The low-ranked flaming creatures that did not know what was good for them had just gotten close to him, but before they could do anything, Gorfus stomped heavily on them. The entire battlefield began to tremble violently, as if it had experienced an earthquake. Powerful energy ripples spread through the undulations of the ground, and all the flaming creatures that were swept up by the energy ripples turned into ashes, not even giving them a chance to self-destruct. Strength greater than 42 points. In just half a second, the AI chip quickly determined the basic strength of this ogre chief. It had to be known that Grimm's basic strength was only at 27 points. This was with the constant supply of the Fire Dragon Feast and the consumption of large amounts of resources to reach this level. As expected of a melee professional that focused on strength, his basic strength was actually higher than Grimm's by more than 15 points. This meant that if Grimm were to face him head-on, he would have to endure a terrifying crushing effect with every strike. Even so, Grimm would not retreat rashly. After all, this was a rare chance for him to kill a grade 4 native creature by himself. If he missed this chance, it would be 10 times, no, 100 times more difficult for an outsider like him to kill any grade 4 creature in the spirit realm. Grimm waved his hand, and the remaining flaming creatures on the battlefield retreated to the sides. The dozen swamp giants also returned to the vicinity of the flaming gate. This way, the central battlefield was left to the 2 grade 4 powerhouses who were facing each other. Gorphus, the grade 4 Ankros ogre chief. From afar, it looked like a fat man with a bloated body. He was more than 7 meters tall, and while he was not the tallest among the ogres, he was definitely the fattest. It stood there quietly like a mountain of flesh. The layers of fat on its body were stacked on top of each other, as if it was wearing a layer of meat armor. His 2 stubby legs were half a meter in diameter, and every time he stepped on the ground, he would leave a deep pit. As his body was too large, he only had a piece of bee skin wrapped around his waist, barely covering his crotch. A necklace of skulls hung around its neck, and a sharpened beast bone was stuck in its huge nose. Its mouth was wide open, and its 2 huge eyes were like copper bells. Its ears were as big as cattail leaf fans, and they almost reached its shoulders. The only weapons on his body were the 2 large stone hammers. Chapter 12:07. When the 2 Type 4 powerhouses faced off against each other, all the participants on the battlefield started to move away. They were just afraid of being affected by the shockwaves from the battle. When there were no longer any hindrances within a 500-meter radius, Golphus raised his war hammer and roared as he charged forward. Dong, dong, dong. The earth was shaking, and the world was shaking. Terrifying shockwaves spread out from where his feet landed, and every step he took left a deep footprint on the ground. The puddles of water and soil around the footprint would be shaken into the air, and under the strange ripples of energy, they would shatter into tiny particles that could not be seen with the naked eye. The Ankros ogre chieftain was like a mad bull as he rammed into Grimm unreasonably. Grimm's flame giant form was more than 10 meters tall, while Golphus was only 7 meters tall. Golphus was clearly at a disadvantage in terms of size, but looking at his barbaric and domineering stance, he did not seem to care about these minor details at all. Grimm quickly cast a spell and threw a few flame vines at his opponent. However, before the flaming vines that stretched out from the void could wrap around the opponent's thick leg, they were shredded into bits of fire by the ripples of energy. With a loud roar, the war hammer smashed towards Grimm's face, instantly turning the flame shadow that Grimm had left behind into flaming fragments. On the other hand, Grimm's real body of flames appeared 100 meters away, and a series of blazing fireballs were thrown at Golphus. Boom, boom, boom. The huge fireballs exploded continuously, causing Golphus to groan and cry out in pain. However, in the next second, a loud roar was heard, and a war hammer flew out from the fireballs, fiercely smashing towards Grimm. Grimm did not dare to hesitate, and used Flame Leap to move 100 meters away, dodging the flying hammer. He had no choice. The difference in strength was too great. Grimm did not have the confidence to block the flying hammer's attack with just a defensive spell. With his opponent's terrifying strength of over 42 points, as long as he broke through the defensive spell, a single hammer strike would turn Grimm's body into a pile of mush. Even if the flying hammer could not break through Grimm's defensive spell, the terrifying shockwaves alone would be enough to make him suffer. If Grimm was hit by the stun effect of a heavy weapon, then this was the pain of elemental sorcerers when facing strength-type combatants. They did not dare to let their opponent touch them. Fortunately, as an elemental sorcerer, Grimm's mobility was far superior to his opponent's. Hence, In the frenzied battle between the two Grade 4 powerhouses, the participants who were originally fighting in full swing had now become street rats, covering their heads and running for their lives to the periphery of the battlefield. The battlefield of the strong was extremely terrifying, and there was no place for the weak to hide. Grimm's flame giant form was invisible. He would either explode into a ball of fire and fly in the sky, or jump around the ogre chief with flame leap. He would have to change his position every few minutes, or else he would receive a terrifying attack from the ogre chief. Yet, no matter how dangerous the battlefield was, Grimm would not stay more than 100 meters away from his opponent. It could not be helped. It was necessary for the battle. While area of effect spells could not be dodged, the spell's power was too scattered and the damage dealt to his opponent would be minimal. Only single-target attack-type spells that were condensed from energy could break through the opponent's force field and cause sufficient damage. However, such spells were rarely instantaneous, and the flight trajectory was too obvious. Once the distance was more than 100 meters, the time and trajectory of the fire spell would be captured by Gorfus. At that time, Gorfus would have enough time to think about whether to dodge or use his flying hammer to break through the spell. However, the pressure that Gorfus' terrifying strength placed on Grimm was obvious as he fought within 100 meters. While the flying hammers did not land on Grimm's body, they still caused the fire shield on the surface of his body to crack as they brushed past him. The battle between the two was like a bear chasing a cat. While it looked clumsy, the moment something happened, the outcome of the battle would be decided in an instant. Since the start of the battle, Grimm had not suffered a single injury, but the ogre chief had been bombarded by fire spells. His body was covered in burns of various sizes. However, these injuries were only minor to the ogres with their thick skin and flesh. Gorfus only needed to use his war hammers to protect his head and heart, and the rest of the thick layers of flesh could be trampled by his opponent. He persistently pounced on Grimm, who was dodging all over the place. Even though he missed every time, his flying war hammers still gave Grimm a lot of pressure. Under the cover of the two war hammers, Gorfus opened his strange triangular eyes and looked at Grimm with a crafty gaze that did not match his size. He was purposely creating a clumsy and inflexible image. If Grimm really thought that this was all he had, then the spirit contract battle technique that he could instantly unleash would definitely give him an unforgettable memory. There were no idiots among Grade 4 powerhouses, be it spellcasters or combatants. The moment you thought that your opponent was an idiot, you would not be far from death. However, while Gorfus was hiding his strength, Grimm was also hiding his own battle prowess. Among the several great fire laws that he had grasped, other than empower flame and increase flame range, he had concealed the two most important laws, flame penetration and flame invisibility, very well without revealing any of them. While the ogre chieftain was plotting against him, Grimm was also plotting against the ogre chieftain. Since the other party was throwing out bait, he would gladly take it. Using the time that the other party was hiding, Grimm did his best to inflict all sorts of minor injuries on him. It would be a waste not to take advantage of this. When the other party unleashed his full strength, there would not be many opportunities for him to attack to his heart's content. While Gorfus was suffering under the fire spell, he sneakily squeezed into Grimm's battle space. His beady eyes spun around as he tried to calculate the chances of his sneak attack succeeding. Grimm made use of flame leap to move about continuously, making full use of the Chip's battlefield senses to gather information on the other party. While he did not have Alice's keen sense of danger, the Chip's forte was to analyze the enemy's movements and the direction of the battle. Under the guidance of both parties, the first explosive point of the battle soon appeared. Using a whirlwind-style hammer dance, Gorfus once again forced Grimm to use Flame Leap. Just as Grimm's tall figure disappeared from the pillar of flames, Gorfus suddenly turned around, his hammers flying to the left and right, smashing toward an empty space behind him. He roared and charged forward, opening his thick and powerful arms to give Grimm a death hug. Asterisk woo-woo. Asterisk the wind whistled. Both his left and right sides were blocked, and Grim had just completed a flame leap. Without 3 seconds of buffer time, he would not be able to use it again. Taking advantage of this time, Gorfist charged forward like a runaway train, his thick arms sealing off all of Grim's escape routes. As he charged forward, Gorfist opened his mouth wide and let out the most ferocious roar since the start of the battle. Formless sound waves surged out from his mouth, compressing the air and forming a visible ripple that washed over Grim's body. Boom, boom, boom. This was the ogre chieftain Gorfist's hidden battle technique, able to use the sound waves of his battle roar to paralyze the enemy's consciousness. The duration was determined by the enemy's mental fortitude. Looking at the flame giant that had been stripped of all its defenses and its wavering body, Gorfist could not help but laugh. There was only a small distance of less than 30 meters between him and the enemy, and no one could stop him from charging in front of the enemy and crushing him into minced meat. However, before the smile could completely spread to every corner of its ugly face that was covered in indigo tattoos, its legs that were rushing forward seemed to trip over something. His fat body suddenly lost its balance and fell to the ground, sliding towards Grim with mud and water all over his body. Unbeknownst to him, a strange wall of fire that was less than half a meter high had appeared between him and Grim. After Gorfist was tripped by the first wall of fire, his terrifying body crushed the second and third wall before using his huge head to smash the fourth and fifth wall. When he slid in front of the flame giant with difficulty, Grim had just recovered from the terrifying dizziness. After using his head to smash so many walls of fire, even with Gorfist's constitution, he could not help but feel dizzy. In the next moment, a pillar of golden flames wrapped around the ogre chief's body and roasted him from inside out. The terrifying, penetrating flames caused extreme damage to Gorfist. Gorfist, who was originally relying on his thick body armor to resist the flames, suddenly realized that the damage caused by the flames had become even more terrifying. It was as if every strand of flame could ignore the defensive force field and the outer layer of flesh, directly damaging his consciousness and the origin of his soul. The ogre chief's flesh was instantly burnt to a crisp. He flipped over and escaped from the golden flames, desperately trying to extinguish the golden flames that were still burning on his body. "Hammer come!" Gorfist roared and opened his hands, intending to retrieve the war hammer. However, even though he maintained this posture for 5 or 6 times, he did not feel like he was holding something solid in his palm. He raised his head and looked into the distance with his eyes wide open. The flame giant was stepping on a war hammer and slowly storing it into his space equipment. As for the other hammer, it had already disappeared without a trace. A gust of cold wind blew past, and Gorfist once again felt the excruciating pain all over his body. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.